Bene Gesserit show. Yeah.
All right. Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Bonanza show. That was my great friend Quentin Farrell with that theme song. Thank you so much, buddy. I got to give you a shout out every time. It just blew me away when you made that song. So today we're going to be talking about Dune, and I actually have a quote before I introduce our fabulous guest. Today's quote is from Dune, which I guess would make a lot of sense. And here it goes. A beginning is the time for taking the most delicate care that the balances are correct. And then the rest of this quote goes something like, hang on, here it is. What did I do with it? I had it, everybody. It says something like this: every sister of the Bene Gesserit knows. So anyway, my guest today is the lovely Benjamin Balderson, and we had another guest lined up. We'll see if he still joins us. Joshua the Branch. But if he doesn't, I think that Ben and I can carry this nerdy conversation all the way till next Tuesday if we had to. But so what's going on, Ben? How you doing?
How's it going, Brandon?
Oh man, it's going great because I've been like sneaking Dune in on like every episode over Sharon. I've just been like throwing it in a little bit, talking about it here and there. So I'm really excited to just talk about Dune only.
I'm super excited for it also because almost every time I throw out a reference, now we're not going to quite get to that today, but I honestly appreciate the second book and the third book more than I do the first. The first kind of lays things out. But for me personally, my favorite spot in the storyline was where Paul realizes that the empire that he built is not what he is. It's taken like the most bare bones, hollow version of what he said, and then turned it into this ritual and turned it into something that's not at all what it meant. And it's such an amazing thing because that translates into so many other different groups in today's world that you can look at, and they started out as one thing, and the founders would just roll over if they saw what it was later.
Yeah, like the government, right? Like
right.
If George Washington or Jefferson or all these people, at least Samuel Adams, we'll say he was probably a real guy because they put his face on beer, but yeah, right, that's how and yeah, I'm sure he would be like spinning in his grave right now, but that's all right. It's great. I just want to give a quick
as we said, it means very specific words. Like when they wrote things, they wrote it in a way that was supposed to be understandable for every man. Everybody that read it went, yep, this is it, this is how it works. And it was a limitation put on the government, and they will sit there and twist it, like with the Second Amendment with, oh, well, it says in here, well-regulated militia. And then they will sit there and pretend like they don't know what well-regulated means. And at the time, well-regulated literally meant that your guns were in good working order. Your equipment was in good working order. So it had nothing to do with regulating the people themselves. They were free men standing up for their own, and that was expected that they regulated themselves. So, but we pretend like we don't understand now, like make all these arguments, like when you go into court, all the words are different, somehow have a different meaning when they say it than when you say it.
Yeah, 100%. That's so synchronistic and right on time, because here in Connecticut, they just passed a bunch of silly more gun laws. They did it like 10 years ago, and then they just did it again. And one of them is you can't open carry anymore, because in Connecticut, if you got a permit, it was technically to open carry. And so you were allowed to open carry. I never really open carried, but now they're like, oh, if you open carry, it's illegal. But I guess it's all right if it prints, or like if your shirt comes up, they say they're not going to arrest you, but what would Paul Muad'Dib say? That's what I'm saying.
Right.
That's great. I'm glad you brought that up, because I think that theme is amazing, because spoiler alert, if you haven't seen Dune and you see what happens at the end, Paul kind of becomes, the emperor of the whole known universe. And he already knows it's going to happen, but the Fremen just unleash on the universe in his name, and he can't even stop it. And he knows even if he dies, he'll just be a martyr, and they're going to do it anyway. And it's crazy to see it happen while he's still alive, because you're right, usually that happens afterwards. But yeah, just think of Jesus, right? The name of Jesus. How many people have been slain in the name of this guy who brought a peaceful message of like, man, just do what you want to have done.
But that doesn't start happening till hundreds of years after his death.
Exactly.
Hundreds of years later, they start twisting his message. You got Council in Nicaea. You got a whole bunch of guys that were never there. They don't know anybody that was there. They're just reading it and twisting it. And now we have what we have today. So yeah, it's one of my favorite parts, because where he looks at his own people and it's like, holy shit, this is nothing like what I want. And then he becomes the blind preacher and preaches against his own empire. That to me is hilarious. That makes me laugh so hard.
Yeah, I know that part is great. And it's good we're talking about this, because if somebody's only seen the Dune movie or only read the first book, you really need to, if you loved it, you should keep going, because I feel like the story did get better as he went on. In the beginning, he's kind of just laying the groundwork, and that's exactly what we're going to do tonight, everybody, because when you listen to this book like I did, when you first start listening to it or you read it, you're just like, what the hell is going on here? Like, what are all these words like Landsraad and Bene Gesserit and like the Padishah Emperor? Oh, the branch is here. Oh, all right, good, here we go. We get to scold him for being late live. Just
yeah
kidding.
Yeah,
I'm just happy.
everybody.
What's up, brother? Oh, he's connecting. There he goes. Are you there, sir?
Yeah, I'm sorry about that. I just lost track of time.
No worries. I can't scold people for being late.
Come on, be more creative than that. Holy shit.
Yeah, it says like we're reindeer run over by a grandmother.
Well, I was actually preparing. I had restarted my computer and everything, so everything's running tip top right now, at least. Anyway, yeah.
No worries. You got to remember, Benjamin and I are like old school ball busters. I think we were both born in the 70s, right, Ben? I'm right about that, right? And we're just like, we grew up in a time where you just busted each other's balls until, you either killed yourself or you made it.
Yeah. Basically like Gran Torino when he's teaching that kid and he just walks up to his friend and just starts mad talking shit at his friend. Yeah, that was male bonding.
Yeah. It was you didn't miss much though, sir, so don't worry about it. We were just doing a little scatting before we begin. We were kind of laying the groundwork for what we're going to be talking about. And what we are going to be talking about basically is we're going to introduce you to the whole book of Dune. So if you've read it or you want to read it, there are going to be some spoiler alerts, I'm sure, but it really doesn't ruin the story, honestly, because it's kind of, I think, in pop culture and kind of well known what happens to him and what happens with the story anyway. So I don't really feel bad about that. Plus, it came out in 1965. So, sorry, guys. But we're going to lay the groundwork with the different powers.
And the first book's the basic hero's journey.
Yeah.
And that's a pretty basic. It don't get funny till the second one. That's where it gets interesting.
Yeah. We're going to have to, my favorite, really, I don't know if it's my favorite book, but my favorite character in all this stuff is Leto, the God Emperor. It just, his point of view on things, and when he's trying to talk to people, he's just like, he's been around for thousands of years, and he's like, guys, I've seen everything that's possible happen. It's like, but yeah.
Even when people do fucked up things, he's like, oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
I like him.
Yeah, exactly. He wants to be surprised. Like when people try to kill him, he likes it. Yeah.
Yeah, he really liked novelty because it was so rare.
Exactly. All right. So why don't we kind of talk about all our just very quickly give like an introduction to how we got introduced to Dune and like what it was to us when we first read it. Why don't you go first, Ben? You want me to go since you're eating, or what do you?
No, either way. But I was pretty young. My dad liked Dune, and my dad was really liked the movie. And again, from the '70s, and wow, and so that movie was one of my first memories of something that my dad was excited about that we did together. And then I think I was like 10 or 12. I read the book, and it was just such an amazing series and concept. And then I somehow, you get a little bit older and it falls away and you remember it. But then one of the things that a lot of people don't know about at all is the sci-fi miniseries came out then when I was a younger adult. And the sci-fi miniseries actually does go through to Leto becoming taking over. And so it refreshed it, and so every so often that, and by then I was again, a young adult. So it's really just stuck with me ever since then. And then when I was in prison, I got a lot of time to go ahead and read them and reappreciate them.
Nice. How dare you? Well, I could say for myself, it's pretty quick. So it actually has to do with like kind of my self-healing a little bit. So I play this poker game sometimes with some friends of mine, and there was this guy there who I was friends with previously, but as things progressed in like 2016, 2017, he started to like kind of show his colors about how he was a lefty, and he would talk about all this stuff. So I didn't see him for a while. Then, 2020 happened, and I was at a game in 2022 and he was there. And I was like, oh, because I like he's a good dude. So I was just trying to talk about everything else. And I was talking about Lord of the Rings. And he's like, did you ever read Dune? And I hadn't. So we were talking about it. And then I just went into this giant rabbit hole from there. And I would listen to pretty much every book that was made about Dune. The original ones 2 or 3 times, and then the other ones at least once. And I do like the original stuff with Frank Herbert better. And I understand the criticisms of some of the people that have with the other stuff, but I am happy that it was done, and I can get in the spirit of it just to kind of and we're going to talk about that a little bit tonight with the history, because this universe we find ourselves in goes like back 10,000 years to a war that happened between humans and machines. And it's very interesting, the dynamic, because we could talk about that in society. I mean, overall. And then, 100%.
What's shocking about that? Shocking is when Dune was written. So this guy was thinking about this book, and it got produced. What year did it get produced? 68?
I think he released it in 65, the book.
Okay, so 65. So that meant, and look at how epic this tome is. So he had to have started writing that in, say, 1960.
Yeah.
What did a computer do in 1960? That was basically a fucking calculator. Yeah. Like, it did not that all the way. Like, whoa.
Speaking of humans, computers, I think we might have lost you for a minute unless I'm lagging. But yeah, no, it's really crazy that I saw it. And it really was because of the human dependency on computers. That was the problem, because people became dependent so much on them. And I guess we could kind of get into it a little bit now, but then I'll let Joshua talk. But the basis of this universe that we find ourselves in with the Dune novel is 10,000 years before that. And even maybe a little before that, there were these men called the Titans, and men and women, and they were just really, really smart people. And they saw that humanity had already branched out to different planets, but they were getting lazy and really lazy, and they were stagnating. So these people were like, we could just take this over. So they basically plotted this stuff together, took it over. And then sometime in between that or after that, they figured out a way to cut their brains out of their heads and put them in these pods of liquid or whatever, and then they could be installed in different machines like spider walking machines, spaceships, all this stuff, and they were called Cymex. So then they ruled, and it was very short. They ruled for a really short amount of time because one of the Cymex titans worked on this AI so much because he was lazy and debaucherous, and the AI got ended up getting sentience and taking over, and then it just took everything over and used the Cymex as slaves because there was a program written in where Omnius, he was the AI, he couldn't kill the Cymex. So and then this, this whole big war happens with humanity, and that's the Butlerian Jihad. So whenever you hear them reference the Butlerian Jihad, that's what it's all about. And the thing that I like about the Butlerian Jihad is basically the way you find it set up. There's machine planets. So there's planets that are run by the machines, and then planets that are run by free humans. And it's like an equal balance. But something happens. This lady, Serena Butler, gets taken in a battle. She has a kid, and then that kid dies. And the death of that kid sparks this revolution among the humans, because there's humans even on the machine worlds, they're just slaves. But in one of the slave master guys actually starts to plan a revolt, and he's speaking with this cogitator who's also a brain that's disembodied, that's still allowed to exist on a machine world, but he's this really smart guy. And he explains the concept of a jihad, when you get people to believe in an idea so much that they'll just throw themselves. So this war machine against humanity, the humanity side, they're really not even like the good guys. I mean, yeah, they're the humans, but the way that they use other people and these ideas to create this fervor, to create a jihad, is just amazing. And then again, we see this in the second Dune book, if you guys look into that, because it's kind of echoed in the way the Fremen pick up the Atreides mantle and go over the universe and just like kill everybody who doesn't submit, kind of thing. But that's basically the universe you find yourself in the Dune book. So, but I want to let Mr. Joshua the Branch talk a little bit. How did you come across Dune? What was that like for you?
You got me thinking. I wasn't really sure what my first encounter was with it, but I remember I dated a girl who said her dad had watched it and loved it, and so I might have got it from her. But it was when I actually got a hold of the book that I really began to become a Dune fanatic. I've probably read it 5 or 6 times, and then I ended up reading the entire series up to, I think, book 6, but I never did enjoy the Brian Herbert and Kevin Anderson installments. I didn't feel like his son really picked up the mantle, so to speak, responsibly. And it could have been done a lot better. But one of the things that I really appreciate you reiterating the Cymex stuff, because I had forgotten about a lot of that. But what's interesting is that, it happens that long ago, but then into the future of Frank Herbert's writings were like after the God Emperor saga, he was actually trying to get humanity stronger so that they could withstand their encounter with what he called the Hunters of Dune. And these were like AI robot type creatures. So it seems to me like it's a cycle that happens maybe over a long period of time, that eventually humans create their own destruction, essentially. And I kind of see that as eaten from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. It's like eventually we gnaw on a fruit that's poisonous, and that seems to be AI. Every time we grab that fruit and eat it, it kills us. So this seems to also be the basis for the Cylons in Battlestar Galactica universe as well. It's like a cycle that repeats over and over like that. And the Cymex kind of reminded me of like the 5 or whatever, these hybrid beings or whatever. So yeah, we're probably just reliving something that's already happened, and seeing their universe, that 10,000 years ago era, is what we're moving into now, because Terra was in the past in the Dune universe. So it's kind of foreshadowing, I suppose. And the jihad part was against machines in that regard, which I think is really interesting. So they were kind of creating, you really helped me think of it this way when you were talking. It's like they create an egregor of this Kwisatz Haderach cult, and it just it's just sweeps the galaxy clean of all impurities, which AI seems to be some type of thing that the universe doesn't want around for very long. At least it seems to want to always wipe it out, so it's like the humans in this book are tapping into the will of the universe. They're carrying it out whether they know it or not, and the AI machine thing's just always there as like a predator, I guess, to keep them on their toes. It's just like it's a dance. I guess you could say.
I love that. That's a lot of the thoughts that were going through my brain when I was, kind of trying to encompass this whole universe and what the story was. So yeah, that was great. I love that. So we're gonna start though. Everybody in the audience. Actually, we should just give a shout out to the chat really quick. Thank you guys. We got Zerlath in there, Amy Burr, what's going on? Shannon LeGros, Mr. Nargis. I said Zerlath. I'll say it twice because he's always here. Zerlath again, family fun guy. What's going on? I just got your coffee and I have something for you I'm going to be sending. So check your mail. It might take a little while, but I got something you're going to love. What's up, Cosmic Lycans? My friend Joe, who I met at a Mark Passio event back in 2019. Oh man, he lives in Connecticut too. That was so great. Bane Bear, what's going on? The Branch. Oh, you're already in here. I said hi to you. Yeah, Caribe, Hinterlanders. Awesome. We're excited. We got a good chat going. Looks like everyone's having a fun time. Yeah, so we're going to start off. I think the most important thing, and we all agree on this to talk about, is the spice, because I think I saw the original movie, but I don't remember too much, and I have not seen the newest movie yet. So, but I heard there wasn't really a heavy emphasis or an explanation of the spice. But even if there was, I think that definitely deserves to be explained. And what I could say about the spice is it's this substance that people can do. And I'm thinking that Herbert was kind of trying to make it look like it was a drug. And I mean, it is a drug, but he was trying to highlight some kind of drug culture. But what it does for most people is it can prolong their life, and it gives them like heightened senses, and they can stay awake longer and all this stuff. But certain people actually can glimpse pieces of the future with it, or they have this crazy experience. And that's going to be along with all we talk about, because that's what Paul Muad'Dib, that's what ended up happening to him. And but it's only produced on the planet of Arrakis, which is a desert planet that is very inhospitable for humans. So these people are out there and they have to mine this precious commodity spice, and they're constantly harassed by these giant sandworms that are, hundreds of meters long. I mean, how long are some of them? Like kilometer?
Well, and they're harassed because the spice is basically when all the worms hatch, when the trouts hatch. So that spice comes with an explosion of the trout hatching. So you can basically imagine it as the way like fruit is, and the seed is supposed to eat that fruit for its original food source. It's the gluten or the germ, and they're taking it and from the area that their babies are in. And so yeah, they're probably pretty butthurt about that. Yeah, like honey to a baby. They're butthurt that you're over there taking it. You bet.
Yeah, and that's a little bit of a spoiler for people if they're just in the beginning of the book or whatever. But again, but yeah, the sandworms produce this spice, and it's the only place in the universe, according to everything we see, that originally produces the spice anyway. Later they, we get into other things, but so that's the spice. You have anything you want to say about the spice, Joshua?
Well, it seems to have a cinnamon accent to it in the text. And I find that a little bit confusing at times, because the effect it has on people, it'll turn their eyes blue, for instance, yet it's often depicted as like a cinnamony red type thing. So
its color is blue. The spice is blue, but it smells and tastes like cinnamon. but it's an ice blue.
Well, yeah, but I think sometimes in the movies they don't do a good job of revealing it that way. They kind of make it look more reddish or something like that, like as a gas. Or something. I've seen it look different ways. For instance, like the flight navigators in the David Lynch film, I think they sit in like an orange gas. So yeah, I think it's a strange substance. They call it a geriatric substance because it extends the life. And so if they take that away, you basically die from your age catches up with you essentially. But if you have a good steady supply of it, then you can live, you have an extended life. So again, it kind of reminds me of that tree in the garden thing about living forever and whatnot. And one of the other things about the spice is that it was linked to the economy. So basically, not only did it extend people's lives, but only the rich could do that. So, they had access to life extension. And so the royal houses, whether that be the Landsraad or the emperor himself, this is kind of where the Chome company, the mercantiles that kind of broker everything, they were kind of like the economic piece that worked in between the houses to, make the spice move around the galaxy. So it was in that way that when they say, the spice must flow, kind of think of that like oil today, or money, the petrodollar, how the petrodollar is linked to oil. Well, in this way, spice was both a currency and a resource. But what's very interesting here to note is that the Fremen, because they were natives of Dune, they were saturated with spice. So whereas the rich normally only had access to it, the Fremen had it in their air, what little water they did have. It was all around them. So they had the blue eyes of a spice addiction, but didn't have to necessarily consume it like people would have to do if they were off planet. So that's kind of an important distinction there, is that the Fremen were like royalty in the sense that they were natives there, even though they were the poorest people in the universe. And since we were talking about distant past, it might be worthwhile to note too that the Fremen were part of the Zen Sunni wanderers or whatever. Like after the jihad, they had settled there on Dune trying to find refuge, and I guess they kind of evolved there alongside the sandworms on this planet. And so that's kind of how spice was discovered, was by these wanderers that had just stumbled upon this planet. So imagine, I guess, if you will, that you just wander onto Mars and it happens to support life, even if it's a little rough. Well, a lot of rough, I guess. And but that raises another interesting point, and I'll end with this for a moment. Was Mars always that way? Well, Arrakis changes, to a green planet in the later books, and so it seems like Arrakis too, just like this AI cycle, planets have cycles as well that they may go through. So the ecology of the planet Arrakis or Dune is also worthwhile to note, I think. And it kind of was like the mushroom in that way, I think, where it kind of helped humans jumpstart their evolution, because it was when they got this exposure to the spice that they started creating the mentats and the Bene Gesserit as alternatives to the AI, so that humans could kind of get their edge back. After all, our mind is a weapon. So we don't have claws and teeth, but we got a mind. And so the spice was allowing us to kind of tap into that. And of course, that's what they used to defeat the machines, was the Holtzman warp, which they got from the spice somehow. I can't remember that detail exactly, but somehow because of the spice, they were able to fold space. And then through the use of that technology, I guess they were able to wage war further out and more completely, and that was how they gained the edge over the machines. Anyway, sorry for the long rant.
No, that's perfect, because I wanted to talk about the Fremen anyway, so I think that was a good introduction. Yeah, they basically were slaves because they refused to partake in the war against machines. So mankind just looked at them as worthless and made them slaves. And then there was a bunch of stuff that happened, and some of them got to Arrakis, where they became the free men. And then, of course, after 10,000 years, it became the Fremen. But I love how they have this desert existence where they walk this razor's edge where, so for people who aren't familiar, the Fremen, they wear these still suits over them when they're in the desert, and it reclaims their body's moisture, and they lose only a thimbleful of moisture a day. That's how valuable water is on Arrakis. And if you lose more than that, you can actually
also
die.
the salt.
Yeah.
Also the salt.
Yes, the salt.
And the movie never points that part out. And so I find that fascinating. They go on about how it reclaims moisture, but in the book specifically, it also reclaims your salts, and you take both of them back.
Exactly. And this is a good time, actually. I'll let you chime in here, Ben. What do you think about the Fremen? What's your take on them? I'm really interested to hear.
That is super interesting, because obviously, and one thing I wanted to say about the space is when you look at it, it very well could be adrenochrome, for as much as it matches up with almost everything that they talk about with adrenochrome, and the rich have it, and you get it from the young. It comes from the sand trout, and at first glance, one would assume that the Fremen are the Jews then, and I think the son takes kind of what people take from the father and alluded. They do say that he's from the Greek area. So I also think that when they talk about the world, they're doing it from the Greek standpoint, where like Alexander the Great, everything he has conquered was the world, and everything else was not the world. And so when they said the world, another world was literally an area he had conquered right over here. And those people had their own religions and their own things. And so he definitely takes it back to Greek. But then also like Cheney has red hair and bright blue eyes. Like, that's very interesting then. But what you get out of the Fremen is, as a people and as a whole, is that they live a very Spartan life. These people, this is one of the first things that Jessica notices, because she starts spending more time with them. The original Duke Leto doesn't really get it, but in her internal dialogue, she's taking note of how everything that they do is with precision. Like they always have these still suits. They're always reclaiming their water. They don't have any lax moments until they get clear back into their siege, and they're in their home with a giant ocean of water underneath them. Then finally they somewhat, and guards behind them, they somewhat lax up ever so slightly. So these people live an extraordinarily Spartan life, and historically, anytime you look at people that live that kind of life, these are some badass people. Always are. If you are living that hard life, you are a hard some bitch. And it doesn't seem to matter whether it's desert conditions or like people that live in the frozen north up in the mountains. Even you look at Game of Thrones most recently. The two badass groups are the North and the desert people. Like all the other people, the wetlanders and the place where you grow crops and have animals and fat bellies. They're like, now them are soft people. Like these are really live very austere lives, really interesting. And then because of that, they're very religious because of this. When you live a hard life like that, you don't find as many atheists living hard lives. Those people in their cultures typically were very spiritual within their cultures, where atheism seems to come more with the soft life, having everything you want all the time. You just, all of a sudden, everything becomes very materialistic. So these are also very spiritual people. And I think that pretty much describes that. They also have been, they're driven from land to land. They got some fucking resentment built up. And this is part of why there's parts in the story where they talk about it doesn't even matter if Paul would have been there or not, that jihad was gonna happen. And that's the parts where he starts realizing that even if he died right now, it just keep blazing. That just become part of the story. And the jihad was gonna keep rolling. And so that's built up into these people. They're a little pissy.
Yeah, and something we see too is the fighting that they have because of this existence, this hard existence they live. And this is a theme in the book that you might not catch the first time you read it, is that the Emperor has this elite, Sardaukar that are like the Marine Corps or whatever, right? And then they encounter these Fremen who are just maniacs, like a guerrilla warfare, hit and run, and they fight because they really are. Their backs, it's like a cat. When you corner a cat, it's going to fight even crazier and even harder. And there's something that's alluded to also with the Emperor in his planet of Seleucus Secundus, which is was actually formerly it was the center of the whole empire, but then it got nuclear exploded somehow. They don't really tell you about it. But then 10,000 years later, the Emperor has all this people on a prison planet, and it looks like he's raising this core of elite soldiers called the Sardaukar. And then when they encounter these Fremen, though, they just get devastated. So, I mean, I think that's something that goes along with this, like you said, the Spartan lifestyle. It's kind of reminds you of, the Spartan and what they say happens when they met the Persians and all that stuff, how they just kind of kicked ass for a really long time until they were wiped out.
See, and then even to further that point, at one point, after Paul gets married and into the empire, because then he marries the emperor's daughter, then he actually makes Seleucus Secundus a comfortable planet, and that's part of the disempowering of them specifically.
Yeah, and he makes that a point too, and that's right at the end of the Dune book when he's like, I'll make it a comfortable place full of growing things,
Mm-hmm.
Basically tell him he's going to take it away. Yeah, so that's amazing. And I guess we're talking a bunch about the Emperor and stuff, so we should probably get down in the breakdown of the structures of power in this whole Dune universe that we find ourselves in. If anyone has any question about the Fremen or anything you want to hear, just put it in the chat. Shout out to the chat again, some legends out there. So the way we find ourselves, so basically this goes back to the 10,000 years, right? So this war against machines. After that, there's this commandment made, then it gets put in the Orange Catholic Bible that we see, that we could probably talk about too. That is, this Orange Catholic Bible we see is basically like a watered down version of all the spirituality of the time that's pretty much authorized for the normal people. And you even see it in the royal houses too. It's very interesting. But one of the commandments is, thou shalt not make a machine in the likeness of a human mind. And it leads 10,000 years later to this universe where you have space travel and you have all these technologically advanced things, but then you can't have a computer that's more advanced than like a calculator. So it creates the society of feudalism. So it's like, I've heard it described like Game of Thrones in space with drugs. So you have this like these royal houses, right? Yeah, I heard that once and I'm like, I'm stealing that, baby. I forgot who said it, but it was some YouTube channel. Thank you. But you have these royal houses, and it's the same kind of intrigues you would see in like Game of Thrones or like the War of Roses stuff in history, you know, but it's on a planetary or universal scale. And it also leads, because there was this invention around that time, these Holtzman shields were invented, and they have these personal body shields that everybody carries, except on Arrakis, and we could talk about that too. But these personal body shields that basically render any kind of projectile weapon useless as an assassin's tool. So everybody gets good at sword fighting and daggers, and it really goes back to, you know, like some kind of medieval warfare. Now, there are these guns called laser guns, or I listened to the audio book, so they say laser guns, but if they have an interaction with a shield, it causes this nuclear reaction. So laser guns aren't really used that much. It's mostly just swords and stuff. So we find ourselves in there, but I see that Joshua has his hand raised. What's up?
I was just going to note that the shields only stop fast moving projectiles.
Yes, thank you.
It basically made firearms obsolete. So instead, people got to where they started fighting with daggers again. And the reason was because they called the left hand's often referred to as sinister. And that's the one that people would use to kill the person that was wearing a shield. They would use the sinister hand slowly and get it up close to the body, and that's how they would dispatch them. I think that was something that's revealed in the training with Gurney Halleck.
Yeah, a shield turns away a fast blade, but emits the slow one, or something like that. Yeah, great point. Thank you. So yes, we find ourselves in this universe with these shields, and like we were, you know, like I was just saying, so that you can't use a gun, it's not really going to help you anymore. So everything reverts back. So there's these great houses, and that's kind of the first power structure we could talk about, is the Landsraad, or however you want to say it. But it's this federation or group of all these major houses, and there's this tripod of power, and they're basically one of the legs is the Landsraad. So there is an emperor, but if the emperor starts acting crazy, all these houses could get together, kind of like, it's like a Congress, kind of like and they could get together, and I guess it would be just like a Congress in the Roman times, because it was all the rich houses and powerful houses. It's just a way for them to balance it, so they can kind of get together and gang up on the emperor if they had to. But
I would call it almost like the UN at this point.
yeah,
They're basically the UN. You know, it's in the Dune world, it's each planet is kind of just represent. It's the king of each planet is basically the Landsraad, which honestly, they don't really get any play in the whole series. I mean, they're referenced, so you know that yes, they could gang up on the emperor, but the emperor don't seem to care. The Bene Gesserit don't care. When you stop and think about it, the jihad, who's the jihad against? Like, that's all the Landsraad. Like, he just goes around and murks them all anyways.
Yeah.
So and says, anybody that stands against me, which apparently was most of them, you're getting murked, and he did. So they don't really get any play outside of being the victim of the jihad throughout the story, and then mention during the political maneuverings, because the book, you know, obviously, and the movie is extremely heavy in political intrigue and political maneuverings, and the balances of power inside of that.
Yeah, 100%. Josh, you got something?
I would just like to add that I appreciate the point been made about the planets basically being a house. At this point, global government was already a thing, you know, and that's just kind of something that's taken for granted here in the books. But a few of the families that I can name off the top of my head would be Carino, which I think is where the emperor himself was from. And then Harkonnen, which is the evil one typically in the movie, in the book. And then there's the Atreides, which are the antithesis in terms of morality and stuff. But, of course, we find out that they're actually related because the Bene Gesserit have this breeding program. So, they're using all these different houses also for breeding stock. So I was kind of hoping that maybe Balderson could maybe talk a little bit about the breeding and crosses and how they were actually trying to get a Kwisatz by using the Landsraad houses. It was like they had a gene pool, and they were, and so I don't know what you would liken a Kwisatz to, like a steer that's like 20 foot tall, with like I don't know, they could see the future or something, but like so whatever they were trying to do, they were trying to cross with all these different families. So could you maybe add to that, Ben?
So I find this fucking subject fascinating, this part, because this is one of my favorite things to talk about, and it makes people super squeamish. So good. Yeah. And in my opinion, the idea, we all were taught and know that the idea of inbreeding did not become a thing until the Catholic Church made that a law. Before that, naturally, you would get married to the people in your local accessible area, which wasn't very many people. And it doesn't take very damn long before you're related to everybody. Any small town has maybe 3-4 families at best. So you've got a couple generations of possible people not being related. After that, it's starting to get funny, right? But this didn't cause a problem. So you start understanding this kind of thing with like the genetics of animals or plants. You look at today's cannabis world. We have one plant that has an extreme amount of THC, like a hash plant, where it's basically has almost no flavor. All it tastes like is hash. There's not a terpene profile to it. The plant doesn't produce a lot of material. It's just a high THC plant. Well, you go, well, I would also like that to produce a lot of material and then maybe smell like blueberries. So we start going and we start doing these cross breedings. And the first thing we do is we take this hash plant and we take a plant that produces other qualities like a BC Big Bud that has these giant lime green buds. And you're like, well, what if these giant lime green buds were covered with hash substance? So you start humping these two plants together. And then that first generation, you go to all the little babies that they made, and you find the two babies that have the best characteristics that you want, that look the most and smell the most and taste the most like what you were trying to make, and then you hump them babies together. And then you take the babies from them and you do that. And after about 5 or 6 times, you can reliably expect that any of these plants that you pop the seeds out of will produce this thing that you've made. And so this is what they're doing with human stock. And they're taking the idea that the nobility is the finest of people. And so again, this brings back to where that whole, where still the royals were allowed to do that. And they very specifically did it. But you can't do it anymore because it's weird now. And because we just said so. And I think that was the first breakdown actually of the family unit, because now the whole village isn't for that. The village pretty much all believes the same thing. And they started breaking that down. Now you got to go to other areas to get your spouse and bring them in, and they're going to teach your kids things that you don't necessarily think because they don't think that. And it started making things a little bit weird. But they let the royals do that. And so they this is eugenics at its finest. And so they were taking then each of these prime examples, like, this strain that's, you don't take this dog shit strain that you found out in this field when you're trying to make some fine genetics to make this awesome, perfect seed. You take the finest genetics and you go around to those and you crossbreed them. And you hope to come up with this super cannabis that smells like blueberries, and each plant produces 20 pounds and it's just covered in hash. And this is basically what they're doing with a human being. And so, like, actually the later books get into it more, where the God Emperor is continuing the program, and the Duncans back in there to give them that mongrel strength, that loyalty, and from here, this line of people, they tend to have more intelligence. This line of people, the DNA out of this line of people tends to be very crafty, very, good with their hands. And I want a human that is always, I don't want just that individual. What is that Greek philosopher, the society that separates its warriors from its thinkers will have idiots doing the fighting and cowards doing the, calling out the orders. It's, he's trying to create the opposite of that, create this Ubermensch, which in almost every culture, that type of thing exists, where the Superman, where you have a whole culture of them.
Yeah, and he breeds for other characteristics as well, and he ends up breeding a characteristic where people are invisible from prescience, and so they can't be located. But again, that's more future stuff. And this would be a good time to break down actually who the Bene Gesserit are in our little Dune for Dummies breakdown, because they that Benjamin Balderson was talking about are the sisterhood of the Bene Gesserit, and they come out of the Butlerian Jihad when all these other groups pop up, and it's basically a bunch of sisters who, it's kind of like a badass order of nuns. They could fight, they could control their body, every movement. If they have a woman, they can control what kind of sex of their child that they want to conceive. And certain ones of them become reverent mothers, which happens to Jessica in the book, where they have to survive the water of life, or in earlier books, it's a different kind of poison. But they basically survive this poison. They can alter the molecular status of this poison when it enters their body. And then after that, they gain this knowledge or this attachment to every female memory line. Basically they're like intact. They can contact or interact with all these memories in their past, which could become overwhelming for them. So it's not something like it's just a superpower in general, but it's this thing that kind of links them together. And they have a few things they do. Their breeding program is one of the most important. They also have this program called the Missionario Protectiva, where they go to these different worlds and they seed these ideas of religions and stuff. Josh, I see you have your hand raised. Go ahead, buddy. You always have something good to say.
I just wanted to add, since we were kind of talking about the breeding.
Yeah.
So we mentioned Jewish people earlier as well. So you're only Jewish if your mother's Jewish, and that's because of the mitochondrial DNA that has actually only passed through the mother. So I think it's a little bit of a hat tip to that Bene Gesserit thing, because when they do become a reverend mother, they gain access to their mitochondrial DNA memory. And so they actually go back through their mother memory, but they can't see the male memory. They can only see the mother memory of their DNA. And that's what makes the Kwisatz so unique, is that he is a male Bene Gesserit. So he can see down through the mother line and through his line. And so that's what they're trying to create, is this basically a male witch king, because they call them witches too. So I think for the witches to have a king is kind of an interesting concept. It's like they know their limits, and they want something that can exceed their limits that they hope that they can control. But of course, he teaches them that they don't have control, of course. And then the God Emperor comes and makes puppets of them all. But and I think that's one of the interesting points to make too, real quick, is how Paul Muad'Dib in the books, he's actually a failed Kwisatz Haderach. He's not even the true one. The true one is God Emperor Leto that comes next. So like you said earlier, Ben, had he not come along, it still would have happened anyway. And that's because the universe has its will and it'll find people to fulfill the roles for the play that's it's acting out. And once you notice a change in Paul's attitude too, once he has this water of life experience, he no longer is like just playing along with the Missionaria Protectiva. He realizes then, we're all puppets of God. I have to do this. And if I don't, it's going to fall to somebody else. And, you know, when he began to falter on his path because of his attachment to the material world, with Cheney and things like that, he started doing things that were not the will of God, so to speak. He started doing things that were going to take him off the path or the way, as his son would explain later. And so it's when he finally becomes blind, you know, and things like that, that Leto comes along afterwards. And it's like the universe was like, all right, sorry you couldn't handle it, Muad'Dib, but your son's going to pick up where you left off. And he actually becomes the worm, abandons his humanity. And that's what Muad'Dib could not do. So as much as they did and I think this is because he came a generation too early. So imagine, Ben could maybe weigh in on this. So, you know, Paul was supposed to be a female that they were going to cross with Fade Rotha from House Harkonnen. And then that cross was supposed to become the Kwisatz Haderach. So Paul came a generation too soon. And that might be why he was a little bit flawed, is because he came, you know, out of season. And so that'd be kind of like, I don't know, maybe knowing what quality you wanted out of your plant and you knew you needed to do this, but instead, for some reason, because your beloved was like, you know, honey, why don't we do this kind of plant instead? And you're like, oh, you know, okay. So, were you saying something, Brandon?
I did want to throw in really quickly that it's funny you said Fade Ralpha, because he comes in the book, and in the earlier stuff, Brian Herbert and Kevin J. Anderson talk about that. And again, like you were saying, you know, I'm not giant fans of what they did, but I have a big enough imagination to kind of just get what they did and then just use my own imagination to where I think how it would have went better. That's what I did with the end of the Game of Thrones TV show anyway. Ugh. But Phaedra Alpha was conceived by Baron Harkonnen's brother. And that was actually, again, the Bene Gesserit had a hand in that. In these books, this Bene Gesserit came along and kind of convinced them to have another child and gave them this thing that was going to make them conceive and all this stuff. So it's crazy how we're speaking to the Bene Gesserit, but their hands are so woven into things and for thousands of years. And when I saw that concept, it really blew my mind, because it doesn't seem that humanity, maybe certain people and certain bloodlines have this long-term plan, but like, I don't even have a plan for what I'm going to do tomorrow. You know what I mean? Like, these guys have like thousands of years planned out. It's really, really amazing. You know, I don't know if you guys want to comment on that too, about the Bene Gesserit.
So I want to get back on the Missionaria Protectiva also, but I believe that Paul was supposed to marry Baron Harkonnen's daughter, because it's Baron Harkonnen had a daughter, because they kind of gave him some drugs, probably some little Viagra or something, got him a little rowdy when he was young, even though he's gay, and so he actually has a daughter.
That was Jessica.
And so, yeah. And so I think he was, or yeah, that's how that line was supposed to cross. And I think Fade, they didn't really like Fade that much. He's basically the equivalent of Paul, but they didn't really like him that much because he was a little But I really find the Missionaria Protectiva absolutely fascinating, because what that is that the Bene Gesserit go around, and a lot of people would say that the Bene Gesserit is like, like the is the Jews, or the Jesuits, I mean, and that's what Crow thinks big time, is that's the Jesuits. And then it just through Hollywood he makes them into women and makes it this whole other thing. But he makes it out because, like, again, Catholic Church, a lot of this seems to also then follow the Catholic Church. So then the Jesuits would be the offshoot of the Catholic Church that also kind of push in that direction and work with it. But the way that they go around, and they don't care about your culture, really. They're willing to implant something into your culture that my friend Sean Elger, he followed. I can never remember the lady he got this from, but it's this thing called paralleling, where you understand the story and you kind of follow the story, but you just veer it off just a little bit. And it's not, something that's that noticeable, but it takes it away from being the actual thing that we're talking about anymore. It's just a slight veering. And so they went around to every planet and every group of people, and they implanted something into their culture in order to, so that way, when something happens, they can come in and they can make themselves into a holy figure, or in this instance, Paul, because it's only through this Missionaria Protectiva that he gets the Fremen to do what he wants. So really, he's acting. He knows what he's supposed to do. He has an idea, and he fulfills these things in order to bring this thing about. And so for me, this really more matches in today's modern times, the Theosophical Society, which people think that that's just some old occult group. But what they don't realize is that was the head of the UN. The Alice Bailey, who was the head of the Theosophical Society, was also the head of the Lucis Trust. Then that became one of the key components of the UN. She's also the head of the feminist movement, the New Age movement, the mother of the New Age movement. And they even had a fucking group in the Catholic Church of the Theosophical division of the Catholic Church, because they don't care. When you start studying them, they went around and took the very surface level of every culture and then just regurgitated it. And they're like, yeah, the Great White Brotherhood, Jesus and Sanat Kumara and any other guy that's a good guy that you can name, he's watching over you in Shambhala. They're going to come help us, and everybody just buys this shit. And so, right. So that's what these Bene Gesserits did, is they went around and they veered off a little storyline in all these different religious cultures, so that way they could implant something in a time of they could go, look, I'm a religious figure, look here, I know the prophecy, I can fulfill it, because they fucking put that in there as like a clause for themselves. So that shit's fascinating.
It's so fascinating. What's really interesting too is that, and I'll let Joshua comment, but I want to say really quickly, because in the Dune book, Paul's doing things like he puts his still suit on correctly the first time, he wears his shoes slip fashion like you're supposed to, and Liet Kynes notices this stuff. So it is like this fulfillment, because just like in magic, when you set up these rituals to have things come into to manifest them, it actually is a manifesting of this because of all this hard work they put into it. It's really crazy how they highlight the magical part. But what were we going to say, Josh? Go ahead.
I would agree and add to that, saying that, the Missionaria Protectiva, was seeded on many different planets, but it was also embraced by a very zealous people with the Fremen. So maybe on most other planets, it wouldn't have actually been so profound. And it would just be used as like a safe haven protocol, to like get a safe house on a planet or something like that. But on Dune, it actually became like an egregor of sorts. It became a living prophecy. And so they wanted a Messiah. They wanted their planet to be green again, and they were even like saving water and putting it underground and things like that. And so they had this very closed system that never changed. And so, yeah, they were very much like the Jews in that way, waiting for their redemption, waiting for their deliverance from, that God was going to literally, help them accomplish this thing. And so, yeah, it was primed for him to come along and do this. But what I find it very interesting about this is the version of this here included a mother and a son. It was not just Moadeb or just Lady Jessica. It was that a mother and son would arrive. And so that mother-son archetype is a very powerful one, even in our reality. Oftentimes you see Mother Mary with Christ on her lap or something like that. And even in the Semiramis, Tammuz, Nimrod stuff, it's very similar to that as well. So it kind of makes you think about, well, our world and what we've been seeded with, like potentially, like you guys were talking about as well. So I think it's a good exercise in looking at our world and seeing what those parallels are. So the Fremen were meant to mimic the Semitic cultures. There's several words that are actually Arabic. And even in the later books, I think God Emperor makes a couple of different mentions of the Jews themselves, because they have this culture that they've managed to preserve, and he preserves them as well for all these thousands of years, because he's just fascinated by them and loves how they maintain, this strict culture and law and order and obedience. And so he was wanting to breed that kind of thing. So he kept them around, So, well, I guess I said enough.
I mean that's a weird thing though, really. Like, he's breeding obedience. Aren't the Jews like typically, right? Didn't they like consistently disobey right. God like throughout the entire book?
Well, there are Jews that are obedient though.
Well, the funniest thing is in the future of
I'm just saying, historically in their book, isn't that like the whole book? Like they basically disobeyed the entire thing.
But you take what's bad and turn it into good. So if they were already naturally obedient, there would be no glory to God, they'd be able to take the credit themselves. I guess that's the answer.
Good answer. And I think the funny thing is, I talked about this with my friend Sarcastic Warlock, who we should probably get him on one of these Dune things, especially because he just left the whole, I don't want to see, the JT cult thing, whatever. He left that. So, yeah. But anyway, we were talking about in the future how there's the rabbi in these books.
I know who that is.
Yeah.
This guy.
Yeah, he's. Yeah. There's
showing it up, huh?
Yeah. He's
found out it was actual Taekwondo.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. We had him on the Oversharing show. My friend Sarcastic. If you haven't seen that, guys, go check that out. And then I had him on the Brandon Bonanza show before that, and apparently the JT guy got wind of it and was like, "Oh, I heard he was on there talking smack." And he's like, "I didn't watch it," and we didn't talk anything about JT or any of that. It was all about like nerdy stuff, like the Bhagavad Gita and Dune, So it's so funny. I'm like, yeah, that's me. I'm like, just say my name though. Say it more. I'm like, more people need to hear Brandon Bonanza. No, yeah. So, but what we talk about though is the space Jews in the future books, and it's so funny because they still carry that victim narrative, right? Like the rabbi is still such a victim. It's so crazy. Even one of his followers kind of wakes up. We're getting ahead of ourselves, but that's very, very interesting. And the other thing I wanted to say about the Fremen too was how fast they go soft, right? Like once, and this happens even right in the next book, but once they kind of gain power, they start to get water fat and they start to go soft and all that stuff. Oh yeah, speaking of soft, right? Paraplegic, is he in here? Where is paraplegic? Oh yeah, there he is.
He's in there.
May I?
Paraplegic.
Please go ahead. Yeah.
Hey, Bear. So yeah, you're right. They get soft because in the future book with God Emperor, the way they walked on the sand dunes to avoid attracting the worms, it had to be very irregular. Well, eventually, when the worms aren't as prevalent, that the way they walked becomes just a dance that the Fremen do, and they don't even understand that at one time it was a matter of survival, that you had to walk that way or you got gobbled up by a sandworm. So, and also
still suits are a fashion thing that's not functional at all.
Yeah.
And the Chris knives were fake too, because those were actually from the mouths of the worms themselves. So they only have the fake tooth and not even a real one. So it just shows how disconnected from their God they had become. Which the tooth, the Hebrew letter for tooth is shin, and shin is the spirit. So it just goes to show, like, eventually the Fremen lost their spirit, and they would keep that shin, that tooth, close to their body. And if they did, it wouldn't rot. But if it left the body for too long, it would decay, they said. And there was the rule too, that if you drew your knife, you had to draw blood with it before you put it back in the sheath. So if you drew it on somebody, and you thought might be an enemy, and they turned out not to be, or you drew it in a mistake, you would actually have to cut yourself before you could sheath it again. So I always thought that was really interesting too, and I wondered if that maybe had something also to do with the sandworm craving water, and like, is the blade actually drinking that blood? Like, what's really going on there? I've always wondered about that. But
yeah, is it like putting oil on wood?
Well, and you kind of do that when you sharpen a knife too, use oil when you do a whetstone. But yeah, I just always found that really fascinating, because the Chris knives they use are actually living tooths from the worm themselves. So it's all very much interrelated there. They practiced their religion, but they did lose it.
100%. And I'm going to take this moment to give a shout out to my friend in the chat, Family Fun Guy, because since he's here, I'm going to show him. I got him this lapis mushroom that I'm going to send him. I was going to send him and surprise it, but since he's here and supporting, or it could be his wife, I'm not quite sure, both of them. What's going on, guys? They're both on the Oversharing show, but yeah, I'm going to send this to him. It's a lapis mushroom. And
I know you were friends with them. I'm also friends with them.
Oh yeah, they're amazing. They've both been on the Oversharing show, so it's been really cool. Yeah, James is actually on.
My son was asking about peacock feathers, and I had to explain it's a very odd thing, but they aren't blue, and you actually only see that like in the light when you rotate the feather. The pigment in the feather is actually brown, and that entire color display, when it rotates, that flashes like bright orange, blue, and purple and all that. That's just refraction from the tiny little cuts inside those hairs.
Oh, wow.
That's really crazy, right?
Yeah, that is amazing. Yeah, good friends. We've made a lot of good friends since we started this journey, so we're really excited. Shout out to everybody. And shout out to the Oversharing show, since I mentioned every Thursday night, but this Thursday we're actually taking a week off because of the holiday, and I have a wedding and all this stuff. So, but I think we're going to be back possibly with Benjamin Balderson actually on the Oversharing show if I hear the grapevine, right? So look for that soon, guys. That's going to be fun. Last time he was on, it was epic, and it's always fun to throw our good friend Sharon in there. All right, so we were talking about all the power structures. I think we kind of talked really well about the Bene Gesserit. One of the others we didn't touch on at all, and this is going to be great because it really brings in the financial aspect of all this stuff, is the Spacing Guild, because the Spacing Guild not only controls this, they have a monopoly on interstellar space. So all these houses that we mentioned, guys, they're basically stuck on their planet unless they pay the guild to transport them, because they have these space folder engines, and they could blink out of existence and then blink into existence in another spot. And they're piloted by these navigators who have to swim in these tanks of spice. So they basically mutate into these, like fish looking creatures almost. They get like flippers. They can't really always communicate with people. It's hard for them. It's different in the different parts of the book.
They're basically almost becoming what Leto becomes.
Yeah.
Only like not the same. It's like they didn't quite take the right path, so they're getting part of the abilities, and they're becoming worm-like, which the first movie really shows that, where he becomes like more worm-like in the first movie in the tank. But it's kind of like Paul, but it didn't take the right path, so they didn't get all the other abilities.
Yeah, 100%. And go ahead, Joshua.
Well, and thank you guys for bringing that up, because the distinction between a guild navigator and Leto, well, first I'll start with their similarities. They're both oracles. So the Kwisatz Haderach, Leto, a guild navigator, they all had this kind of like a shield around them that they couldn't be seen by other oracles. So whoever had that ability of prescience wouldn't be able to see that other oracle. They could see where that oracle might be going, and they can see where that oracle might have been, but they can't see that oracle in the present. And so this is an interesting thing to say about their similarities, but how they're different is that, yes, they did kind of take different paths. And Leto calls his the golden path of humanity. And so this is his kind of like how the guild navigators plot a path through space that's not going to collide with planets or stars. He plots a path for humanity through all the obstacles and stuff through a period of 5,000 years. So in a way, he's kind of doing with humanity what the guild navigators do with like a cargo ship in space. He's transporting them through time, through 5,000 years of time, though. It's just not instant. So I kind of find that interesting too. And that's why he had to become the worm, because that was part of his path. Is that what he called it though? The golden path?
Yeah, the golden path. That was amazing. I love that analogy, bro. I didn't even think about that.
Well, and so he's a worm, right? Wormhole.
Yeah. Whoa. You're blowing my mind over here. This is great. Yeah.
And they fold space. So one last thing I'll mention is we do have a kind of a parallel in our times also with prophecy. So the rapture a lot of times is likened into the twinkling of an eye. Well, that phrase in Arabic is te al-ard, which is the folding up of space. Ooh. And it's to be instantaneously transported to another spot on Earth by the folding up of time in space, which is by divine assistance. So in a way, what they're achieving here in the book is very similar to that concept of that, which, maybe a rabbi or a Sikh or a sheikh or rather, or some holy man would be walking from this town to the next, and maybe it should have taken a week, but he arrives in a day. And it's that te al-ard concept that is divine assistance, and it's known as shortening of the way, which Kwisatz Haderach is known as that, shortening of the way. So he folds. It's like the lightning path on the Separat tree. It's made short. Some people can just take their shortcut if they can see it, I guess. So in a way, he that golden path was kind of like that Shaktipat lightning path.
Wow, I love it. That you just made up for being late. There you go. No, I'm just kidding. That was great though. That was great. Because I didn't even really make those connections. And you're right. Kwisatz Haderach, I think, directly translates as the shortening of the way, or something like that. Or there's another one later. But yeah.
Actually, in Hebrew, it means a seed of brotherly discord.
Ooh.
See, and for me, the way that Paul failed was that he didn't sacrifice his ego. And so through his love of his Cheney and his children, Cheney, through his love of Cheney and his children, he couldn't sacrifice that, where Leto did fully give up. And so his humanity fully gave up his ego. And so through that, as an alchemist, that's when you complete the circle, because then you take the ego out, which was acting as like a blocker, and now you have the Jormungandr, the all the different snake references, where the snake head bites the tail. That is the sulfur and the salt marrying and becoming one. And so he went through the actual alchemical ritual where Paul did not. Paul basically opened it up. And so this matches like the Odin story, where Odin first goes to the well and throws his eye down the well. And this is an opening of ancestral memories. And I've explained this about Odin before. When he does that, this is the high oil. The high oil's job is to unlock the lowest salt. And so this is why he's throwing the eye down the well. But he doesn't continue on and sacrifice the ego like Odin did, where he hung himself at Yggdrasil and sacrificed himself to himself. And that's when you complete the circle. You marry, you do the actual chemical marriage and become the philosopher's stone as a person. And this is what Leto is doing that Paul did not. Paul didn't sacrifice the ego, he refused.
Yeah, and something I was going to say earlier too, I'm glad you brought that up again, was that it reminds me kind of like in Star Wars, where they didn't want to train the Jedi because they were past a certain age, because I feel like Leto took that step, because even though he did have all the memories, because he was this Kwisatz Haderach from when he was born, so he got all the memories of everyone who ever lived. He had them in his brain, but he was able to sacrifice his ego and give up everything, give up like, a sexual experience, and to ever actually love somebody, or a true human experience, maybe because he was a child and he felt this destiny weighing heavily on him. So it bit harder than it did on Paul, where Paul was just like, as Josh would say, he became the blind preacher, the blind worm, Muad'Dib's moon fell. He just couldn't do it. But I wonder if that's what it was. It was the age.
Yeah, Paul, there's even parts later where Leto, like when he gets his flipper shot off with a laser gun, he's like, yeah, I was eventually going to fall off in a few hundred years anyway, so whatever. Like, doesn't even care.
Yeah, exactly. And that's really, it's coming from that place of youth, kind of like an innocence almost, Josh, did you want to say something?
Yeah, thanks, man.
Yeah.
You touched on this interesting distinction there between Paul and Leto. So yeah, Paul hasn't been exposed to the spice until he's about 15, 16, something like that. Whereas Leto was exposed to a lot of spice while in the womb. And so this begat what was known in the Bene Gesserit community as an abomination. So this type of thing had happened from time to time. And you'd think, well, if you can be born knowing everything, so on and so forth, why wouldn't they just all do this on purpose, right? But what would happen is, if they became awakened in the womb, they would also become possessed by one of those life memories in the person would actually dominate that person. So they would actually have no hope of ever becoming a true individual. They would be possessed by one of these other personalities that is in their genetic past. So when you mentioned Leto there a moment ago, he actually had to become possessed willingly by the first emperor ever. And it was like Haman or Amun or something like that. And it was like the first tyrant ever of humanity. and he allowed that beneficent, strong personality to take him over to keep all the other ones in check. So I think that's maybe an interesting point to make as well about the abomination and such.
And
Yeah.
by possession, he does mean they're all in the person's mind all the time.
Yeah.
But possession being where one of these personalities, one of these ancestral personalities is so strong that it takes back over in the present. It just like you're no longer in charge. And this happens to Paul's sister, who was also given now the water of life. What that is they keep around young adolescent, really small worms, and then they drown them. And the water, and like there's other cultures that you hear doing this, and they take in the things from a dead person, where it basically becomes this stew. You know, you release your death juices into this water, and this water was used to kill this worm, and now it's poisoned, and they have to take this poison and transform it into something not poisonous. So then the other people can take it. You're able to just change it. And this is like when Brandon was talking about earlier, like with how would they control what sex of a child they have? Well, pretty easily. Depending on the pH of the vaginal canal, if the pH is too high, the X chromosome sperm are much more susceptible to this. They'll die from that acid right now. And so all she would have to do is for somebody that can control of every component of their body, change the pH of the birth canal, and now you can only have girls. Fairly simple.
Yeah, 100%. So we kind of got, I mean, it was a great little tangent, but we did explain a little more, but we were talking about the Spacing Guild. And I have a couple more things I did want to say, but it was basically, so the Spacing Guild, they have this monopoly on space travel, which by default also makes them the spice, have kind of a monopoly on the spice in a sense where you need their travel to get the spice, and all these great houses who are addicted, and the emperor and all these people, they need that spice to flow. And so, you know, if you're someone who's kind of new to this, you're thinking about it, if the emperor, he can't really make a move against the Spacing Guild because then they just won't move him. They'll leave him stranded, which has happened in some of the past books to people. So, and the same thing with the Landsraad, you know, they can't pull off these intrigues and these Connolly wars that they have, these wars of assassins, where they kind of just go direct warfare and they try to keep civilians out of it and all this stuff. They have a strict code. They keep it, really what's allowing that to happen is the Space Guild. So that's why they're so important in this. And they also control the bank. You know, so you have anything to say there about the Spacing Guild, Ben? I'm sure you got a few things.
Well, one of the other components of that people don't automatically think about is they're also the easiest to control.
Yeah.
So while they have the most control individually, they're the easiest to control, because while they control space, they can only do that with spice. So at some point in time, if you cut off their spice flow, they're dead in the water too, just like everybody else. So that's super interesting. Again, I would almost take the spice more to a adrenochrome type thing. And while we're thinking about oil and oil running the world, it really doesn't as much as we think. And I think the things that trade inside of these, what the Landsraad would be, is the ultra rich. Like, honestly, most of us, we think that somebody's rich because they got a fucking fancy car and a nice house, and like, oh, that dude's rich. No, they aren't fucking rich. Rich people, true rich people, they can't spend all the fucking money that they supposedly have, all the numbers and digits. They can buy islands, freaking whole countries, arm it with whatever. It doesn't matter. They've got more money than you can possibly imagine. And for them, it's monopoly money. Yeah, they make it. They print it. So something else is of value to these people. Something else is the currency of trade for these people, without a doubt. And while the spice must flow, they don't ever talk about outside of the Fremen, you know, because the Fremen are the ones mining the fucking spice and living in it. Yeah, they get access to it. And then the Landsraad leaders, the kings, get access to it. None of the common people get access to it. None of the Sardaukar, which I did want to make a point on those guys, that it does seem like while they aren't necessarily clones, they are all processes of extreme genetic manipulation and probably made in a lab. So that's why Baron Harkonnen, when he's looking at them, he's like, they all look like Leto, the original dude, not the young dude, Leto. The original Leto, he's like, they all look like Leto. So you know that Leto was an extreme component of the Bene Gesserit breeding program, hence why Jessica thought she could even breed with him and produce the Kwisatz Haderach. He was so advanced into the breeding program. So they are all modeled off the DNA that he possesses in some way, shape, or form.
And it actually goes back further in the Butlerian Jihad and all those books, because you have Vorian Atreides, who's the sire of this, and he's actually a genetic son of one of these Cymex I was talking about, Agamemnon, who's the head of all of them. He basically, before he cuts his brain out, he takes a bunch of his sperm.
Isn't that the guy Jacob or Joshua couldn't, Agamemnon?
Yeah, maybe
the one who
Agamemnon
takes over Leto.
Yeah,
I think that's who takes over Leto's mind, is Agamemnon.
That could be possible. Josh would know. It was some far guy way back. But yeah, so Vorian Atreides, and then he defects because originally he's a machine guy. He's like loyal to them, but then he defects and he has this life-altering substance, life-altering operation that the machines could do to people to make them last longer. Before they make you a Cymic, they do it. So he ends up living for like, I don't know, 500 years or something crazy. And it's funny because you think about all this biblical stuff, right? These people living forever. But he's a progenitor. He's one of the originals. So I'm guessing that's probably why he falls in so heavily. And his daughter is actually the first woman who becomes a Bene Gesserit Reverend Mother. So it's interesting how that's all just intertwined in. And for 10,000 years, you get this line of people.
That's my point. See how small that is? That exists in our world also. And so when we're trying to imagine it, we're imagining it on common person level. We don't even realize what is important to these very tiny, tiny group of people. Like even when you start podcasting and associating with like more famous people, you all of a sudden realize that it's not 7 places to whatever. It's like one place to everybody. Like it's a tiny room.
Yeah, I'm sure you have some experience with that, right? Anyway, Josh, you got something you want to say? No, I know. Yeah.
I found the name. It's Harum, Harum. It says here that Harum was the dominant ego memory in the Council of Personalities developed by Leto. So he actually had a council of strong personalities, and this was the lead of that. And this was done in order to manage the tumult of inner lives and memories. It is unclear whether by accepting the presence of Harum and his consciousness above the presence of his other ancestors, that he became an abomination. They say it's unclear, but he chose the most beneficent tyrant he could find.
That's great.
And other minds also. So he's like, he basically was the guy who just got into prison and is like, I'm gonna be somebody's bitch, so it's you.
It kind of reminds me also of Yaldabaoth, how he becomes the worm. And a lot of people look at Yaldabaoth with negative connotations because I think what a lot of people just don't like is people don't like rules. And Yaldabaoth is a very Saturnian type figure with a lot of boundaries and rules and things like that. So Leto kind of represents that same Yaldabaoth energy, who's also a blind worm, incidentally. And in the later books, he kind of breeds humanity to be able to overthrow him, so that they can become strong enough to actually do that. So I think that there's a lot of parallels there with the Gnostic Yaldabaoth. Oh, for that matter, the Emperor's throne is the Lion Throne. So when Leto occupies the Lion Throne, he is the lion-headed serpent, essentially. So he is Yaldabaoth.
Wow. Yeah, it's amazing how Frank Herbert got all these. I mean, I don't even know if some of it might have just been like channeled coming through.
Right.
And I mean, I guess he did look pretty heavily into a lot of Islamic stuff and a lot of the names of things, and I also really like how he blended like the Zen Sunni religion, these things that you wouldn't think of as the same, but you get like these Zen Buddhists that are also like Muslim. It's very interesting.
Well, and that goes back to the original proto Fremen, because they were Zen Sunni when they first arrived at Arrakis. So that's why Fremen culture has this Zen Sunni philosophy kind of running as a thread through it. It'd be like if a religion today had a Socratic method woven into it, or so it's kind of like the tradition it's in. And we kind of see that come into big focus later on, like when Leto encounters some of the more primitive Fremen tribes in the desert. He kind of has to prove that he's not possessed or not an abomination by like reciting Zen Sunni parables and things like that.
So that's interesting then. So would a Rohingya monk be basically the version of shit? What's the outcast tribe? Would that be like a Rohingya monk? Because they find their Zen through the killing of a Muslim. You kill Muslim, you reach Zen. You're good.
It goes back to the bastardization of these ideas, right? Going back to the beginning, what we were talking about with Paul getting worried about the Fremen taking over and having this jihad in his name, when it's something he never even meant to happen. That's amazing. So,
and I don't necessarily, I'm not sure that I see it the way the branch did. I don't think that the Bene Gesserit implanted the entire religion into the Fremen. They just planted pieces. They just veered things. They took the planet's natural, and these people were naturally more religious zealots because of the Spartan life that they lived. They had more of a bent towards zealotry anyways. And then you combine that with the historical reference of them being driven from planet after planet until the only planet that they can live on is this shithole that nobody would want to live on. And then here comes the Harkonnens to fucking fuck that up too and torture them even in this shithole. Like, damn it, leave us alone. They built up a bit of resentment, I suspect.
Well, I still think they were somehow favored, because even though the books never really talk about God, it's kind of implied that the Fremen are the chosen of some unseen force. None of the other cultures really seem to even have like a shamanic element to them, because all this is even very foreign to Paul. The closest thing he can relate to is like his experience with the Bene Gesserit. And they only take and borrow from these things because they know they work. And So I think it's kind of interesting that the Fremen were like the vehicle for some divine will that I don't think the Bene Gesserit ever even thought like that far ahead. Maybe the Kwisatz Haderach was part of their own prophecy. Like they wanted it to happen. They just didn't realize how it would happen, and that they were actually doing God's work, quote unquote, like, being guided by the unseen hand, if you will. And I think that it's not until you kind of get into the later stuff where Muad'Dib like super doses on some spice and goes into the coma. I think it's after he wrestles with the worm. I don't know if we talked about how the water of life is obtained, but he gets that and then, realizes like, oh, okay, this is actually all real and true. So I just think it's kind of interesting that it's like, it's all make believe until it's not, I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I could totally see that. And from the way I see it, it's kind of like they, from what Ben was saying, they took parts of things and they wove it in to make it fit that the Bene Gesserit it is, wove in their narrative into the Fremen's already existing structure, which was the Shariat or whatever, right? The great teaching and all this stuff.
But that is a lot like the Jesuits and the Theosophical Society. So
Yeah.
the point he was making, kind of trying to hijack something that is real. That was a pun, actually. Or hijacking the worm, if you will, because they did ride the worms as well. So it's like they can see that this thing is real and they're trying to commandeer it,
Yeah.
100%. And see, and then even the creation of Israel in itself, they knew ahead of time that this was, oh man, that gets so fucking deep, because then you look at the fucking Balfour Agreement, where the English crown said they would help do whatever it took to see the reinstatement of Israel as a country. Well, then Israel as a country would only be reinstated after 6 million Jews were sacrificed as wheat before the chaff in order to see the Holy Land return to the good Jews. That's according to their Torah, their books. So when England agreed to see this happen, they knew the prophecy. They knew the conditions that needed to be met to see this thing happen. And so all of this has just been this giant stage that they have set up, and ooh, look, it matches prophecy, because they know the fucking prophecy. They read the book.
Exactly. The Dune 4 declaration instead of the Balfour declaration or whatever.
Yeah.
Right.
Like when you're dealing with religious things and you know that a certain symbology will be seen as a religious phenomena, which will be a fulfillment of the prophecy, then you just make those things happen. It's pretty fucking simple. And Jessica and Paul, during different times in their original dealings with the Fremens, as Brandon said, there was parts where Paul just naturally did a few things, but there's other parts where he knows, I'm fulfilling a prophecy. I'm making a choice right now. I can either do this thing and this outcome will happen, or I can go into the prophecy and do what they think I should do, and then they will do what I want them to do.
He's the Lisan al-Gaib, the voice from the outer world. He was born off planet, but came to them, and he would already know their ways. So this was part of the thing, was like they accepted a non-Fremen into their tribe. And let's go over maybe a couple of his names too, because his name's Paul, and then he gets the name Usul, which means strong pillar. And then
pillar base, right? The base of the pillar.
And then after that, he gets Muad'Dib once he becomes like the Messiah figure. And then the Kwisatz Haderach is more like a title that he gets, at the end of that. And of course, then he gets Emperor. all in Duke. So he
Duke.
had
Well,
this,
and I think there's actually a number of other religious titles that he fulfills too. I think there's a number of them. Depending, I think they leave reference to it, but they don't necessarily name them all.
the Mahdi is shared with Islam. They foretell the arrival of Mahdi, which will be a military figure.
Well,
Yeah.
Muad'Dib, I believe.
That's what I was going to say.
Yeah.
The desert mouse. Yep.
Oh yeah, thanks.
And all that comes to him in the prophecy. He sees that as people calling him Wad'Dib. But then he asks him what he wants to be named. And he's like, what's the name of that mouse? And it's like, well, did he already know the name of the mouse? Like, was he going along with this stuff again? You know, it's more of this stuff. It's kind of like when life happens to you sometimes and you just let it happen, you know? It's that same thing.
No,
It's like, stop it.
I've been in those instances where I know if I do a thing, you know, like the magician, like the illusionist, he knows it's an illusion still, and everybody's going to believe this if you do this, or you can wreck the whole thing. You know, we all have them moments where we know if we go with the flow, what's going to happen, or if we don't, what is also going to happen, and we choose. And sometimes you choose to just step into that.
Well, if you think about it, he had the title Duke. So Duke and Emperor, those are the material world authorities he had. He had the authority with the tribe as Muad'Dib, so that was like a spiritual thing. And the Kwisatz Haderach was also similar to that. So it's like he had temporal and ephemeral, both, like kind of like when you see the Pope with his triple crown. You know, the Kwisatz Haderach was kind of like wearing every crown, you know, crown of the material world, the world of the mind, and the world of the spirit. You know, it was like once he had all of them together, he became like the complete type figure, as imperfect as he was.
Yeah, I actually have a quote here from, it says, when law and duty are one, united by religion, you never become fully conscious, fully aware of yourself. You're always a little less than an individual. And that's kind of what that represents, those two titles of he's the God and he's the ruler of the law and the ruler of a religion. Takes on this whole other aspect of things.
That was perfect, man. Good job.
Thank you. I was like, I know.
Also,
go ahead.
which is also super interesting because just in today's society, you start hearing that term getting thrown around. Like with Trump, a lot of people threw out God, Emperor, Trump, and it's like, really?
That's who you're gonna pick out of all the people you could pick. They should have picked Charles Manson if they're gonna get a God Emperor. Just go for it all the way. You know what I mean?
It would have been
Yeah.
good to have before he passed away, Marlon Brando or something like that. I don't know. Like they could with AI, they could bring him back. But that's
Uncle
what they.
Ted?
Excuse me.
Uncle Ted?
Yeah, Uncle Ted. I was thinking that too. Oh, that's a good synchronicity. Yeah, the Unabomber God Emperor.
That movie would be the bomb.
Yeah, I like it.
He's already written a manifesto. I mean, he's got that under control. Come on.
Right.
It's already like 3/4 of the way there. Isn't that the way that works? You just like write a manifesto and
Well, you got to write it with Ixian crystal for this.
Verdulian crystals.
That's where he fucked up.
Oh, that's funny. Family Fun Guy said Uncle Ted. I just said that to Elise. Yeah, we were thinking that. Well, you know what kind of company you're in, everybody, when we all can pick our guy
He's ready to lead. He was ready to lead the Butlerian jihad. Old Uncle Ted was.
Yeah, he really was. Oh, that's amazing you bring that up. Yeah.
Are you surprised that they didn't try to make the recent movie of Book 4? I just personally found that as a missed opportunity because, the first 2-3 books have kind of already been done, and I was hoping that they would do Book 4 finally. because with the way they do all the cut scenes and the flashbacks and all that, that would have been fine with book 4, because that's how the book's written. He's constantly falling asleep,
Right.
dreaming about the past and telling
Constantly internal dialogue that spans thousands of years.
Right. Exactly. It would have been perfect. So I was kind of disappointed, honestly, about it all. But anyway, that was just a thought I had.
I actually am. My favorite version of the movies is the miniseries that Sci-Fi did.
I agree.
I like the first one a lot for specific reasons. I mean, it's just they put so much glamour into it, like the sets and the outfits and Sting and a cod piece. And I mean, you know, that one was awesome, but for true to storyline and just excellent. The second one was, and I also find it super interesting that the dude that plays Leto, who eventually in the mini series, they stop at the third book. So Leto, you never see that Leto in and of himself is an abomination. But it's interesting, the guy that plays Leto also plays somebody with split personality in like at least 2 or 3 other movies. He plays that Glass with that movie, that like 3-part thing with Bruce Willis and Samuel L. Jackson, and he's the guy that his one personality is like bulletproof. Yeah. He plays the guy with the multiple personalities, and depending on which personality, he has different things he does, and the one is
the Beast.
You know, yes.
Didn't recognize that.
He plays, right, and look at how many movies that guy plays fucking multiple personalities in. That's a little weird, right?
Yeah, see, right? That's a weird underlying theme. There's also another character in the Dune verse called the Beast Raban, which is one of the Harkonnen brothers. So there probably is this element of the Beast archetype, like the material man. And you can contrast Fade and Paul in that way too. Paul was very chaste, didn't try to, get with the princess, waited, had one wife, was having children, very based. Fade by contrast, his
murdering people all the time for fun.
Sexuality was ambiguous, had lots of women and prostitutes around him all the time. He was very indulgent and materialistic. So I find that, and he also fought dirty. He tried to gouge Moadib with the poison belt buckle. So I find the two personalities very contrasting as well.
Well, in the book, it's the because this goes back to what you were saying earlier, Joshua, with the left hand being the tricky hand. In the book, then he talks about that has the poison blade, and everybody knows he has the poison blade, so he's going to go ahead and switch it up to the other side and trick him.
Very interesting detail. And in the occult, the left hand of God is the venom of God. So that's kind of along those same lines there. Samael usually gets that title.
Amazing. Yeah, and the funny thing is in the Brian Herbert, Kevin J. Anderson world, Fade Dralta, his parents are like really nice. They're Baron Harkonnen's brother. It's forget his name. I'll think of it. But anyway, Adlerb, I think it is, or something like that. But they're like really nice guys. They run the planet Lankavale, where they get the whale fur from, and they just want to be left alone. But the Baron and the Beast Raban sweep in and steal him because he's a possible heir. And the Beast Raban is actually a child of Adlerb, whatever his name is, Harkonnen as well, but he just goes totally the other way. He's like a total maniac, really. He ends up killing his own father. What were you going to say there, Frank? Frank Herbert. Joshua.
Oh, thank you for the compliment, Frank Herbert. You called Frank Herbert before. Yeah, nature and nurture, man. I mean, you can kind of reference the twin studies there too, of how genetically they are predisposed to be raised a certain way, but then the environment can corrupt them, perhaps. But somebody in the chat was wanting to ask about the arrangement of the marriage, the arranged marriage of Princess Irulan. So I just wanted to mention that and see if you had any thoughts about it.
Yeah, so people who know, Princess Irulan is the emperor's daughter. He has only daughters. Because he marries a Bene Gesserit, and that Bene Gesserit is ordered to only give him daughters. He does, of course, the emperor doesn't know this. Emperor Shaddam IV. So his oldest daughter, Princess Irulan, at the end of the book, Paul gets everybody in the room, and he's basically king shit. He's got the guild who, controls all the movement we were saying and all the transportation, but they need the spice. He's threatening to destroy all the spice. He's like, fuck it, I'll take it with me. To destroy a thing is the ultimate power to control it, right, guys? And he tells the emperor, this is how it's going to be. I'm going to marry your daughter, and I'm going to be the emperor now. So that's where Princess Irulan comes in. And throughout the book, you don't really know this first time you're reading it, but all these quotes are from her. And once I realized that, I wasn't worried about Paul anymore. I'm like, oh, I guess he gets to be emperor then, if they're making all these quotes about him. But she's the one who writes histories and everything. Yeah, the memoir. So she's the one who writes all the histories and stuff. She becomes his wife, but in name only. So he takes Chani, his Fremen wife, to have his heirs, and then he just has her as his wife in name only, though. So he never even touches her.
She's also the nanny, though, in some regard. She does care for children a little bit.
It's super interesting in the movie. They kind of play her off as she just got stuck in shit circumstances. She actually loves Paul, and so she takes care of his kids. No, she's conniving and scheming as fuck. Like, she was fully in on this. It looks kind of like she got used because Paul marrying her and then becoming emperor through the marriage was going to get anyways. Unless, assuming that this was a patriarchy, he was never going to have a son anyways. So having somebody else become the emperor was the best he was going to get. So this was basically, all right, well, this is what you were going to get anyways. It's not so bad. And then that would make it less objectionable. Obviously his power was ended right then and there. That was the objectionable part. And this took some of the sting away from it. His bloodline remains valid throughout it. Chani even jumps in on trying to get him to hump Irulan and pump out some kids, because Irulan is sneaking poison to Chani in order to keep her from conceiving. They did conceive once when they were during the original battle, which they have a son that dies, which basically gets skipped over in every movie so far that I've seen. Hasn't been anything about it in any of the movies so far. He does have one son that dies, but they try very hard to keep him from having another. And then Chani ends up going on like a religious fast where she has total control of everything that she's intaking, and once the poison quit coming through her system, but the pregnancy then kills her, blah blah blah. And so really by the keeping her from getting pregnant, it made it so she lived longer. That's why he doesn't kill Irulan, because Irulan actually extended his time with Chani. That had she gotten pregnant all those years ago, she would have died from it. So she's much more conniving and much more plot driven than in the books than they are in the movie. And so is the nephew. What the hell's his name? The emperor's nephew.
Oh,
what's
yeah.
That?
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. The one who becomes Hakaladan.
Farad.
Yeah,
Rod,
yeah,
yep.
yeah. Fraud, yeah, yeah.
I would like to add also that whenever the Emperor is left with no other option, he doesn't actually enter into combat with Muad'Dib because he knows he can't best him. His power lies in his Sardaukar troops, not in his own ability. And so it just demonstrates his impotence, where he has to concede to who he knows is a much more powerful and capable man. And so he cedes his daughter almost as a spoil of war in a way. And it's like he hopes that he can still manage to have some type of influence or something through her. But she had dual loyalties because she also was in league with the Bene Gesserit, and administering the abortifacient drug, for instance, was part of the scheme of the Bene Gesserit. And I actually suspicion that she probably only died because of that medication, that maybe she wouldn't have died otherwise. But that was interesting to think about her life being extended potentially because of that.
I mean, you have to assume Paul knew, like, because he specifically said that she was good, whatever caused her to die through the pregnancy, that was going to happen anyways. So part of why he spared Erelon is because he extended Chani's time with him. Had she gotten pregnant years before, she would have died anyways from whatever is going on, whatever thing the twins did to her.
Yeah, and he also wanted to punish her, I think, by never letting her have an heir. Or anything like that, because he was basically cutting off the head of their family, so they would never have another an heir apparent. Because then that, if they had created one, then it would create more intrigue and maneuvering and things like that. So by never giving her a child at all, it thwarts that. And in fact, it turns the Fremen into a royal family, essentially.
Yeah, and it's interesting that Leto takes Hak Aladan and has him to start their breeding program with his sister Ganima. Spoiler.
Yeah.
So
I'm gonna need you to go ahead and hunt my sister, dude.
Yeah. He's like, but she's like 9. He's like, yeah, just wait a couple of years. Not yet, but
yeah. But when it's time, I'm gonna need you to do it.
We're gonna say it's me, but it's gonna be you. Oh yes, trying to get people to. So maybe we should talk a little bit about like Gurney Halleck and Duncan Idaho, maybe some of the characters for people, because they might, they might not exactly know everything, and they kind of just throw them in there. Woodshop, shout out to the chat real quick. He said, "This is great. Been listening the whole time, just playing Zelda. Don't you know video games will rot your brain."
Well,
Pride Month's over, Woodshop. You're supposed to go back to normal.
Yeah, it's July now, man. Come on, put your big boy pants on.
Well, Gurney came from the slave pits. He was rescued by Duke Leto the First. I think he was rescued from the slave pits of Seleucus Secundus.
No, PD Prime. He was from the Harkonnens. Yeah. So Gurney Halleck basically, in the earlier stuff too, that was, I think it was like in House Atreides, all those books. He was that's why he hates the Harkonnens so much, and that's why he wants revenge on Beast Raban, because the Harkonnens, he was living there with his family on Gidi Prime, and it was like slave conditions, and they stole his sister and they made her a prostitute, and then he kept trying to fight them, and finally he just found a way to get off planet, and he went to the in that story anyway, but in the Dune story it said that the Duke rescued him. And that's where he gets the ink vine whip scar from Beast Raban in the slave pits. He whips him with it. So that's why he wanted to kill him later. And Duncan Idaho, too, is very interesting because you don't realize it in the first Dune book because he dies. But spoiler alert, they have a way to bring people back. In Duncan Idaho, if you read the whole thing, it's kind of all about him, in a way. It's very, very interesting, and his upbringing is.
It gets so fucked up for that dude. It really does.
Yeah, that's what it is. I think it's just because he keeps going through all these lives with the Emperor, and Emperor's like, "My Duncan, is my Duncan ready?" He calls him my Duncan. What's up, Josh? Go ahead.
Well, and in that way, I think that Duncan Idaho represents the Lamb of God, because it's like the lamb son of Yaldabaoth. So he loves his Duncan, and his Duncan exhibits all the qualities that he loves. And his Duncan's also always very loyal to Atreides. So his Duncan had the one trait that he liked the most, and that was obedience. And what he enjoyed most about his Duncan,
Not obedience, loyalty.
well,
Two different things.
well, it was similar because
Not similar, because Duncan regularly looks at what Paul's like, what the fuck are you doing, bro? Nah, not doing that. Like loyalty and obedience, not the same.
well, but I would add this though, that it wasn't until Leto's actions would cause the Duncan to rebel. Yeah, and that's usually what happened every time when he would clone Duncan. Eventually, he was loyal because he was Atreides, but God Emperor was doing things that would eventually cause him to not be loyal. He would rebel because he had this moral fiber in him that was as such. So he was loyal, yes, but not unquestionably loyal. He was loyal to a set of principles, is what it was. And so,
from the way I understood it, though, where he always, every time he always lost the loyalty, was he eventually opens up his salt memory. He remembers who he actually is, not what he's been programmed, not what he's been reprogrammed, because he starts out with program. Then when he gets to the Atreides house, he gets reprogrammed. They immediately put him into a deprogramming and reprogramming situation. And then at some point in time, because the God Emperor says this, he's like, I always hate when I push him to this point, because then he snapped. So he opens up his actual memories and remembers everything from all this time. And that's where he finally rebels and says, this is not Atreides.
well, it's not just that, because there's also like where he sees where he's got his breeding program going on, and he sees the women sleeping together and stuff because they're practicing their sex techniques. He gets really turned off by that because he's all ultra conservative. And so, yeah, his old memories are like totally based, ultra conservative, but also he's got this unquestionable loyalty. He's also got this attitude of sacrifice. So he dies for Atreides all the time. So I think he very much is like an Aries archetype, because they're always talking about how his hair is really curly and things like that. So I always see him as like a goat or a lamb or something like that whenever I would read about him. And I always felt like Frank cast him in that on purpose, you know. So, but it does make me think of like the God the Father and Son kind of archetype, because the focus does kind of go onto Duncan heavily into the later books. So I would agree with you there. Which the second part of his name is Idaho. So if you look at the Arthurian legends, Idaho was one, which I can't remember.
If he had been Duncan Oregon, he would have been really cool with the drugs and sex.
What?
He'd have rainbow hair. If he was Duncan,
I said if he
Oregon.
would have been Duncan, drugs and sex instead of Duncan, Idaho.
He was Duncan, Oregon. You broke up.
Don't make me explain the joke, Joshua.
So, but see, I think in what it was, he wanted to have this standard himself as he was aging through the 5,000 years. Leto kind of lost touch with humanity. And so I think what it is, he kept the Duncan around as a touchstone to kind of always remind himself, like, okay, this is my guiding principle. This is what I want. You know, just like he would sometimes breed people for certain traits. It's like he had to know that as long as what he was doing was like the Duncan got pissed and tried to kill him. He's doing it right. He's still on the golden path. It was like something that kept him in check, like a Marcus Aurelius kind of thing, where he had that guy behind him that was always like, "You're just a man. You're just a man."
They do make a lot of Greek reference, so the Marcus Aurelius, that one definitely makes sense.
%. And Duncan's upbringing, again, it's not brought to us by Frank, but he is born on Giedi Prime, which is also another planet owned by the Harkonnens. It's their homeworld, and his family is thrown into jail. They're like upper class, but then they're thrown into jail when he's like 8, and they take him and they train him with a bunch of other children to be hunted for sport, and he's like the best of all of them. So Beast Raban takes him into the woods and hunting him, but Duncan gains the upper hand at 8 years old, and he's able to, because they really underestimate him, so he's able to kind of overcome these guys and get away from them. And then there's this lady, I guess she was involved in his family getting ratted out, and after she ratted him out, she didn't get any reward or anything, so she was pissed about it. So she wanted to piss off the Harkonnens, so she rescued Duncan and got him transported to Caladan, which is the homeworld of the Atreides. And then he ends up in the Duke's service, and the old Duke, so Duke Leto's father, who's Paul's father, so Paul's grandfather, and that's when Duke, the grandfather, gets killed by the bull. And Duncan plays an instrumental role in that, because he's actually watching the bulls and he's trying to warn everybody, but no one wants to listen to him because it's a conspiracy. And after that, Duncan's taken in and he becomes, a very adept warrior. He gets sent off to be sword master training, which is like 4 years long, and people die during the training and stuff. So he's this elite badass, and he has all this loyalty to the Atreides because they fight the Harkonnens, and you know what? The Harkonnens are the bad guys, and who knows better than Duncan Idaho, growing up and during all that shit. So that's a little more of his past for everybody.
Well, and the loyalty applies to Leto, the first Leto, and Paul. So when this is a pre-existing loyalty that is basically inherited to the young Leto, and where the discrepancy comes in between that is when young Leto's doing things that he do not match what Paul nor old Leto did in any way, shape, or form. And so that's where he starts freaking out every time.
Yeah, thank you for making the point for me. That was perfect.
Yeah, in the movies, I like the newest movies for that's one of my favorite parts is I like the Duncan in the new one with Jason Momoa. And then I like how they showed him more as the hero of Atreides. And the other two versions, they call him the hero of Atreides, but they don't really allude to why. It's just, he's just a badass, I guess. Where in the new movie, he saves Paul, pretty badass scene. And then I like Gurney a lot in the new one too. Like fucking Patrick Stewart is Gurney. Like Patrick Stewart's not a badass. Like he's not like a rogue minstrel, freaking amazing swordsman badass. Patrick Stewart, get the hell out of here. So I did prefer that the way that they portrayed those two in the newest movie. Gurney almost has the loyalty of Duncan. It's pretty damn close. Gurney ends up hooking up, basically becoming Paul's stepdad. They don't openly state it, but it's pretty heavily alluded that Gurney goes and spends all his time with Jessica, and she spends all her time with him, and so he basically he takes that position. But he's also the one that when Paul gets killed, he's the one who kills, goes absolutely berserk with it, and kills the shit out of it. I really enjoy the mini series one where he stabs him like 83 times. He's just like, like just pissed.
Go ahead, Josh.
Thank you. So you guys mentioned the old Duke. And I appreciate that came up. One of the things that I did notice they included in the new movie a lot was the bull's head on the wall. They made a really big deal out of it. And I'm glad they did, because it's not something that gets a lot of attention usually. And the bull still had blood on its horns from where it had gored the old Duke and killed him. So this whole concept of bullfighting is interesting to me, because through something that happened to me, I did a long dive on bullfighting and learned that it actually comes from Atlantis. So this is something that they did way back when, in pre-flood times. And then after the flood, they migrated to places like Spain and, maybe anywhere else that we see bullfighting. But the way it might have manifested in Greece was leaping over bulls, which is something I've heard Mario Garza talk about in symbolic studies before. Bullfighting and leaping over bulls were perhaps two very related things. So imagine what the old Duke might have been doing. Was he actually fighting the bull, or was he leaping over the bull? Like, what was he really doing with the bull to have even gotten gored? And I just find that whole bullfighter motif interesting, because the constellation Orion is a bullfighter essentially facing Taurus. So it's this very ancient type of archetype, I think. And it's the concept of dancing with death, because of our human bodies. Over time, once we're not at our peak anymore, the bull eventually gets us, And so it's like, once the old Duke was past his prime, the bull got him, So I think there's a lot of deep symbolism there that could maybe be unpacked. And I don't think it's ever really been, I've never really been able to get to the bottom of it. I enjoy the fact that it's there. And I've often wondered, like, why he included it. I'd have liked to have seen Frank's notes about that. Because maybe he was kind of making a reference to, the Atreides are actually Atlanteans, which would make the Kwisatz thing obviously make a lot more sense, probably,
Yeah, I like that. And also, when you're spinning the tale of a Messiah or Mahdi type figure, you're going to have people in his direct lineage as looked at as gods later. So it's that way that it kind of happens in life symbolically, just like it happens in the stars. It's all just reflected.
Yeah, it's the hero's journey, but for more than one person in a way, like the whole lineage, like you're saying. Kind of how the Olympians were all siblings, all 12 of them.
You're muted, Ben. How dare you?
How dare I? I've only done that once. So our typical progression right now, to me, doesn't make that much sense with the way we do our understanding of the sky clock. And for me, the sun is should be after representations, or more after Taurus, when you're more summer and fall representations with like your wheat harvest, things like that. So that's going to be your lion. And so and specifically Leto is the lion of Atreides. So I think that this was a marker. They're trying to show
Dude,
the
you're
change, the perception.
Yes.
That they're trying to show perceptional changes with this.
And then the betrayal with Harkonnens, and then Moadib would be Aquarius, because he even brings water at some point. So yeah, man, you're right. Thanks.
Yeah, so I think, and then I think that obviously then further, when it moves on to Leto has a more full understanding of the procession, and he's going through the entire cycle.
Which is why he's the world serpent. Yeah, he's all the seasons.
Yes.
and one.
Yes. Yes.
That's pretty deep, man.
Yeah. The serpent or the worm. Yeah.
100. Hold on, I gotta fucking.
Amazing. What about let's see, what other characters could we talk about? Maybe Thufir Hawat.
That was the Mentat in the employ of Duke Leto.
Yep.
I'm just gonna say I tried this whole like bull riding thing. Everybody's all about messing with bulls. I tried this whole bull riding thing. It was wicked easy. I just, you know, I don't know what's supposed to be so fucking special about that. He sat there, I sat there, you know, as nobody gave me a buckle or nothing. I sat on him for at least fucking 15 seconds, way past 8. Way past 8.
Yeah, but did they have a rope tied around his dick? Isn't that what they do to the bulls at the?
No, I did not tie a rope around his nuts.
There, you see, that's all he got to do is just not tie a rope around his nuts.
Yeah, I also appreciate it when nobody ties a rope around my nuts. That just doesn't seem like a thing.
Somebody in the chat mentioned how Leto is Leo without a T. Thought that was kind of interesting.
Oh, and the T is the.
There
cross.
you go. Nice, nice, well done. Yeah, and he's the lion of Atreides. I like the scene in the mini series is done pretty well, where the sister is basically running the entire empire, and she's fully caught. And Duke Harkonnen, his fat ass is taken over because it's in their lineage through the mother, and he steps in, just blasts the fucking entire door right off the hinges. And I don't think he did that in the movie, but in the book he does anyways. But in the movie, when he steps in and roars, and then just mashes all the Sardaukar that are around, because that's what is the emperor's, because now the Sardaukar serve the sister, and so he just goes in and handles all the Sardaukar in the entire room in like 2 seconds flat.
Oh yeah, I love that scene. Did you have something to say, Josh?
Well, speaking of murdering Sardaukar, you got me thinking about how in the books, I don't think this ever really gets mentioned, but in the old movies, I think it was the David Lynch version, they had the weirding modules where they had, I don't think this was in the books again, but they would shoot energy bolts through these like pistols that they had. So basically it was
killing words. They had killing words, one of which is Issa. I've always found that fascinating, because like Issa means ice and heathen. It's the straight up and down rune. That's one of my dog's names, Issa. It's Issa.
Oh, Issa or Isa. That's the name of the Messiah in Islam when he returns. Christ's return is known as Issa in Islam. Sorry, what? Oh, yeah, sorry, I got thrown off track there. So, yeah, those weirding modules, they shot pulses of energy, and that wasn't really in the books, but I liked I didn't know where David Lynch got that. And come to find out, that's how some of the Proto-Indo-European cultures, they had weapons that required mantras or words to use, kind of like the Vajra, for instance. So I wondered if maybe he had a little bit of a background there and was just including that, but yet Frank didn't include it. So this was supposed to be, because Duke Leto was becoming popular and strong, but it never really went into great detail about why the emperor wanted to get him knocked off. He just didn't want the competition. Well, I liked how David Lynch took liberty there to show like it was this technology that they had developed that made them kind of like a threat. It's like, oh, our Sardaukar troops may not be a match for this. We better take this guy out before he can really, get a foothold. And so that's why they kind of set the trap for him on Arrakis, where they were feigning taking the Harkonnens out as the stewards of the planet and putting the Atreides in, when in fact it was just a plan all along to assassinate Duke Leto. And one last thing, since I mentioned the assassination, the tooth. He always makes a big deal about the tooth. The tooth is what he gives him as a way to get revenge, and it's like a poison capsule that he can crush and spit into the face of the Baron when he comes face to face with him. But what I think is interesting again is how the tooth again is shin in Hebrew, and so we got the tooth that's used as a knife when it's the worm's tooth, but then he's also given a poison tooth to use as retribution. So I wonder if maybe the tooth is a big deal here. It's got the numerical value of 300 in gematria, and it refers to the two front teeth specifically. So like when you put your finger in front of your two front teeth and make the shh sound, that is the shin in of itself. So I wonder if Frank was tipping his hat to that.
Well, I would almost, again, with the teeth, also, that's just part of your bone structure. Like when the rest of you is falling apart and falling away, your teeth are still there. Like they even talk about, pigs will eat everything but the teeth. So that's where your last ancestral salt is going to be. That there's a whole lot of push and understanding through that entire book of the ancestral salts and the masculine side. And so that would just again be a more of a representation of the masculine side of things, where the feminine side is your oil and the salt side is your masculine. And again, the teeth is the last part of that. So that's super, super fascinating.
Remember the tooth.
Remember the yeah, it's interesting. I just one of the Instagram chats, I think the lovely Sharon from the Over Sharon show that we do every Thursday night here on the Brandon Bonanza show, channel. Make sure you check out that show. She forwarded something into the chat about bones and teeth and how teeth are like made of porcelain or whatever. It's different. It's like they're different density and they lasted. Like you said, they're the only things that last, or they're the last things to go. Yeah. Makes you really think.
So the feminine side of things is the more etheric side, where the masculine's that dense salt side. And this entire series, the character is supposed to be opening up that masculine side and getting that. So I just find that again a representation in and of that. I find that thread in numerous different ways in this storyline.
Yeah, 100%. And Joshua put up a message in the chat about talking about the Dune Tarot, which I do want to do. But right before we touch on that, I just want to go back over what the Harkonnen thing and the Atreides thing, because we are kind of doing a little bit of Dune for Dummies. So when you come into the movie or the book right in the beginning, what's going on is, so the way the power structure works, Arrakis, the planet that produces the spice, is given to different families, and it's like 100-year thing. I think they do it for like 100 years, and it's like a bonus that's given up by the Emperor. And what's going on though is the Emperor seems to be kicking out the Harkonnens who've been there for about 80 years and installing the Atreides, and that's where we find ourselves, and that's the trap that's laid. So just in case anyone was unclear on that or how that worked or whatever, that's what was going on. And like we just said before, ostensibly they were doing it because they were like, oh, we like the Duke Leto, but they're really doing it just to set him up. And, they sent all these Sardaukar there from the Emperor dressed in Harkonnen livery. So they were dressed up like Harkonnens. That's where you get that in the book. Just in case.
Three legions. And at one point in time, the Baron Harkonnen, with all of his armies, says one legion would wipe him and his people out. And they sent 3 legions to try and, which also then lends credence to understanding that the Emperor did have fear of Duke Leto's power, because one of the things at the beginning that Liet Kynes noticed is that Duke Leto is willing to sacrifice finance in order to see the betterment of the life of his people. But at the same time, he's very proper. It's not like he's buddy with his people. He's got a rigidity, but he's also benevolent. And he thinks in his head, this would be an extremely powerful man to try and deal with. And so the emperor did not have that kind of appearance to his people, and neither did Baron Harkonnen. And so he was very threatening. And as Joshua pointed out, if they were at some point in time figuring out how to harness because they do talk about Paul being able to kill with a word in the books also, and Leto further. So I think he just kind of reimagined that, because they don't go into a whole lot of detail with it in the books, and that he was teaching them the weirding way, so the voice would somehow be part of the weirding way. The only thing I ever, and then they also teach them how to do like that displacement thing where they're kind of in one place and they can shift to another place real quick.
Prana Bindu.
Yeah. So that very well could be that would make some sense. But it was mostly he was scared of the Duke Leto. So yeah, they basically handed him a hand grenade. They left the entire planet in a desolated fashion, and while they're trying to play catch up, they're busy planning an attack. And they have insiders, including a doctor who has been through Imperial conditioning, and there's an assumption with the Imperial conditioning that this doctor will never ever be a traitor because of but his Imperial conditioning got broke, and so he just basically opens up the shield doors, lets everybody come in, and it's actually not too hard after that. When you're in a castle and somebody throws the doors open, that's not good.
Well, but the emperor was also in on that. So I wonder if, even though it seems like he did break his training because they had his wife, and Baron Harkonnen had his wife captive. So yeah, it does seem like they had leverage on him, but at the same time, the emperor was complacent in what was going on. So it's almost like it enabled
complacent's a good word. That's a good one.
Yeah, I could see that. It's a good point.
Huey, was that his name? Dr. Huey?
Yeah, Dr. Huey.
Yeah.
Huey. A million deaths are not enough for Huey.
They had his wife, right? Like in suspended animation. It kind of reminded me of that Han Solo scene where he was like in that carbonite slab.
I thought she was being tortured also somehow, that they were very specifically torturing her, and that was part of his problem. He knew that they would kill her, that they would never let her actually go free, but just to see an end to her torture, and then attempt to kill the Baron, because they really make it out like he knew the outcome. He was just hoping to take the Baron out with him.
Remember the tooth.
Yeah.
And I do like that later in the books, there's a little bit of a redemption arc in the late books for Yui. And then also, I guess we shouldn't spoil too much, but just keep reading the books, guys. It gets interesting. And then, after the Space Horse, Horse the fucking
Brian say it.
Yeah, man.
If
So
you're not from New England, you can't say it proper.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Holes. So the Dune Tarot, this is something that we've seen I've seen a couple times that somebody on Reddit put a bunch together, and then recently I just saw Josh threw it in the chat, a different one. I think that would be something that would be very interesting, a project to get into. But what I wanted to say about it is interesting because I think it's the second book that comes into play, and it muddles prescience. So people can't really, like Paul Muad'Dib, we can't see into the future as well because all these people have Dune tarots and they're like giving readings for everybody. It's like it's 2021 all over again and everyone's giving Dune readings. That was a dig on myself. Tarot readings. Yeah, everyone and their sisters getting into tarot now on Dune. So it's amazing that they never put one out. I really wonder. I'm sure they planned on it or whatever, but that would have been an ingenious mark. I mean, that thing would sell.
Well, one of the last things I sent you shows that they actually did have a plan in the works, and it never came to fruition. So there is actually original art out there. It's in the Telegram chat, I think.
Yeah, that's right. I remember you put that in there.
It's horrible that never came to fruition. They do allude to it most heavily in the miniseries, where the Reverend Mother, when they have her trapped before they, when everything's starting to unfold and they have her captive, she's sitting there playing it and laying it out.
Yeah, the Reverend Mother Helen Mohaim Gamet, or Helen Geis Muhammad, or whatever her name is.
Yeah, she's sitting there playing the deck of cards, and that's the only real reference you see to that too much. Then other side of that, but the mini series, I said she's actually sitting there playing it, and then they're doing, her and Erlon are doing little hand signals and talking to each other in hand language. So the guards can't.
That seems to relate to, I think is it Mary Stewart? I've mentioned this before when I was talking to Abby. But there's something called the Patience of the Saints, or Patient of the Medici, which is when you take cards, and it's basically like, the way I look at it is almost like playing solitaire with yourself, but it's got this aspect of the Dune tarot kind of thing going through it as well, where essentially what you're aiming to do is collapse timelines or collapse possibilities or probabilities. And so I kind of view the tarot as that as well, because really playing cards it's the same thing as tarot.
It's the minor arcana.
Yes. So for all that, what they're doing there is kind of running the numbers, so to speak. And that's what Mary Stewart was doing too. The night before her execution, she had her cards and she was trying to basically create what they call a chain of events. And she couldn't create a chain that would allow her to escape. So when we see that scene of Mother Mohaim, she's basically doing the Patience of the Medici right there with her tarot, trying to find an avenue for her to escape, but she can't find one. And so whenever she meets with Princess Irulan, that's part of what they're doing there, talking with the hands, is she's trying to muddle things, like Brandon said, but she realizes she can't beat his prescience. And she was involved, and the reason she got into that situation was because they had gotten one of the guild navigators to obfuscate their machinations. They were planning to try and assassinate Muad'Dib in book 2, and because of that, she got caught and caught in her own web and ended up in that situation. But that's a historical event that I think would shed some light on that scene, that I personally thought was very interesting. And I also dropped the picture in the chat too. This seems to be the legit original artwork. It looks kind of strange, actually. I mean, it doesn't look too Dune-ish, but there are some, like with the worm, which is funny because they call the worm Alat here, and that's really close to the Hebrew word for worm. So I think that's interesting. And then there's another one here for the great worm. So if you maybe click on that, you could probably bring that up on the screen. People
You
might
mean like that?
There you go. Thanks.
There you go, everybody. So
This
Go ahead.
IXION is pretty interesting too, because that would be for me that would be like a time cycle. And even the great worm, look, it's going around in a circle in a Fibonacci spiral.
Read this.
And then
text.
there's the wanderer would be fucking Paul when he's blind.
Right.
Great mother's self-explanatory.
I could read the thing here for everybody. Dune Tarot. The secrets of the Dune Tarot are said to be revealed in the Ajar book, but its obscurities only pique the inquiring intellect and convey nothing to the uninitiated. Some revisions of the Orange Catholic Bible confirm some of the symbols, but these spurious editions have unreliable origins in older, abandoned faiths from the time before space travel. Scholars date the tarot from more than 20,000 years ago and find in the Dune Tarot some symbols common to the cultures as diverse as the Bene Gesserit and the Fremen. However, initiates in the mysteries refuse to divulge any secrets of the temple, and indeed refuse even to acknowledge that a temple exists in physical and not just in ideal form. A tarot deck has 78 cards, the major arcana, 21 cards. Actually, it's 22 cards because the Fool is 0. And power symbolizing the forces of greater importance in man, society, and the universe. The minor arcana, 56 cards divided into 4 suits of 14 cards each. The number 7 is the mystical seed from which the deck grows. Each minor suit has 7 cards. The major arcana or trumps has 3 7, and the suits together total 77. The Joker or Fool is an unnumbered in the pack. Oh yeah, I guess they're right then in that respect. Some have argued that the 4th suit, that's all we get. But yeah, so there you go. I like that how they frame it in the futuristic tense of 20,000 years.
That's really cool. Yeah, that needs to become a Kickstarter, man. Totally. Gotta get rights to that. Kevin Anderson and Brian Herbert. What's going on here?
Yeah. I know a few people who'd love to illustrate this. I mean, come on, I'd be one of them.
I did like
this great mother is definitely Mercury. It's got the 8 path symbol underneath. This is going to be 8 paths. It's the feminine. This is definitely Mercury on this great mother.
She's also wearing a veil. Very high priestess kind of vibe. But what I liked about the sci-fi series for Children of Dune, I think it would have been, when they depict that scene, they the cards were not even cards. They were like metal plates.
Metal plates. Yeah, them are cool as hell.
They seem to fit together in geometric type patterns. So I thought that was a really interesting take on the tarot as well, because here we see the original design as just a normal tarot deck looking kind of design, but then they took artistic liberties to come up with a totally different thing. And I really liked the way they depicted that in the sci-fi miniseries.
Yeah, that's the way tarot used to be. So we don't even really know what the fuck a tarot deck is. And the original tarot decks, at best, there is no such thing as a complete tarot deck. And when they talk about the Sola Busca, that's the most complete, newest one. There's all kinds of older ones that these decks were taken apart, and these were actual plates like that. And they were given out to different royalties and whatnot. And some of them would be like bejeweled inside them and everything. Each, just having one was supposedly this, fabulous work of art just to have one. So our understanding of pre-Sola Busca tarot is only for the rich. Again, this is, people don't even understand, like Wolf of Wall Street, that guy he ain't rich. He ain't never been rich. Like, that is nothing compared to some of these people that are making billions and billions of dollars every day. Like, our idea of rich is completely different, and these people have access. I mean, these are the people that were doing shit like buying mummies, like raiding Egyptian tombs and buying mummies and grinding them up and consuming them, and other things like that. Like the shit that these people do on a whim. These are the people that buy and sell other human beings. Like, that's who got access to these really at one point in time before the mass production of these cards. When they were these exquisite pieces of art, the only people that had access to them were the ultra elite, and they're still the only ones that have access. We get a shit reproduction that all the realness has been taken out.
It's like that quote, millionaires don't use astrology, billionaires do.
Yeah.
Yep. And they don't share. There's a reason that the only magi or the only sky reader or people like that were only allowed to work for the king. All the rest of them got killed. Like, you don't get to have this. This is only ultra elites knowledge. We don't want to play on the playing field.
That's an interesting point about the king being in the employ of the king, because Atreides are the hawk, right? And so with augury, birds were reserved for the royalty in terms of augury. Like peasants and stuff used bugs or whatever, but for royalty it was always birds. So I think that's interesting that the Atreides is a hawk as their symbol, and it's like something that their totem, kind of telling about their personality or something. Maybe America.
Fuck yeah. Well, speaking of America, fuck yeah, I just want to let you guys know that it is now my born day. Go
Woo-hoo!
me.
Happy birthday.
Congratulations on staying alive.
Yeah, I made it this far. I'm excited. I'm excited that I'm actually live on a podcast when it's I think this is the first time that's happened.
So you're gonna go ride the sandworm now? Like,
I do.
The rite of passage. You got to do it.
Oh man, have you guys seen the commercial for the new one?
I saw the thing for it, but I didn't click on it yet. I really should have.
Oh, it's mean. It looks mean.
Would you try it? I think I would try it. I think.
Ride a sandworm?
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
So by time, give me fucking a couple months, I will have sandworms out having a tea party. I'll be sitting on top of one. Like, why do you guys act like this is tough? Fucking worm just wants its belly scratched.
Exactly.
So, did you ever get anything Dune related as a birthday gift in the past?
I have not yet. Well, not yet, but there's still time.
Well, I'm glad that this could be the first Dune themed party.
Yeah, I think that's it's actually, now that I think about it, it's pretty synchronistic that I've been talking about podcasting about Dune for a while, and now I'm doing it, and it's the day that I enter the realm. I have to ponder this. And I'm 47 today, which is an 11. That's got to mean something.
It's a prime number.
Yeah.
So you can start studying the Kabbalah, man. You're old enough you can start doing that.
Yeah, the occult period. You're not supposed to enter the cult till you're in your 40s, which is super fascinating. And I understand. I mean, I was smart when I was young, wicked smart, but the things the way that you see the world, and I mean, then further when you look at Leto, like, could you imagine seeing the world? Like, you've seen everything play out again and again. And he's like, yeah, all rebels are the same rebels. It's always the same. It all comes from one thing. Like, they might change it a little bit. Oh, we're different. No, you're not. Like, wow.
Well, and that's what I think
Yeah.
is so funny is because that's the attitude most people have toward like the Sky Father or Yaldabaoth or some type of central father god figure. And it's like I think it's very much the same thing as like we're all kind of rebellious, but in the end, it's like you learn that it's necessary because if this entity didn't exist, we wouldn't even be here to argue about it. You know, like there's something that it's done to establish this, whether it's conquering chaos, defeating Vitra, the giant serpent, or whatever. I don't know. But I think it's really interesting because Leto seems to represent that sky daddy kind of thing, even though he's a worm.
I got another quick quote that goes in line with what we were saying about revolutions. This is from, I believe it's from Chapter House Dune. Great book. It says, in my estimation, more misery has been created by reformers than by any other force in human history. Show me someone who says something must be done, and I will show you a head full of vicious intentions that have no other outlet. What we must strive for always is to find the natural flow and go with it. The Reverend Mother Teresa.
That's very succinct.
Yeah, I got all these quotes on command. Sorry.
Reform usually
I
a lot
got toilet paper. My Doom quote of the day: toilet paper.
yeah, reform usually comes with a lot of people losing their heads.
Yeah. Yep. Just like the slig farmer. He's like, whatever, whoever they're at the top, it doesn't matter. They all want slig meat, right? At the end of the day.
I don't remember that reference.
He's like,
And then at the end of it, it doesn't matter. And that's what you really learn with the second book with Paul, where he thought he was trying to put in these reforms. And here we are back in the same fucking place. God damn it, I am the emperor. I'm the bad guy. Son, fuck. You know, like.
Well, and here's another interesting point. He wasn't just the emperor. He was emperor and priest, because there had even been like a religion crop up around him. And that's what he really was, that like people were selling trinkets saying that Moadib had touched this or worn this or whatever, you know, and like people were always like hawking trinkets out in the marketplace. And it reminds me of when Jesus went into the temple and ran them all out with a cat of nine tails. It's like that was kind of like what Moadib was doing in a sense too. He really got aggravated by the commercialization of spirituality,
of his spirituality, yes, and how they twisted it. That is my favorite part, like, of the whole series.
He called what he had what there was even a ministry of truth or something. It was called like the Quizzerat. They go around questioning people. There was like his inquisitors. That was one of the interesting things that did seem to develop. So he differed in some ways. And so if we look at the tarot deck, the tower shows both an emperor and the priest or the hierophant both falling out of the tower. So in this way, he's both the hierophant and the emperor both. And there's also a quote, Brandon, maybe you have this one on command, about how when politics and religion ride in the same cart, it's like tyranny or something. I can't remember how the quote goes exactly, but there is a quote that explains how those two things are naturally separated, and when they merge into one, they become like a terrible force to be reckoned with. And it's like he found himself at the helm of that wagon of death. He couldn't control it.
That's like my friend Cheney, Project Cheney. Like she says, every now and then you got to check and see if you're in a cult. And then after you figure out you're not in one, then you got to check and make sure you're not leading a cult. Hey.
Oh, that's so great. Yes, I know. I actually thought I had that quote, but I could read a couple other fun quotes that I have, and then we can kind of close this up and get out of here since we've been going for about 3 hours now. I think we did it some justice, and then people can leave in the comments below if you're watching this afterwards if there's anything you want us to cover.
Longer than the movie.
Shout out to the chat, by the way. Thank you everyone that's in there. Stacy Sunshine said she'll be out. I'll be 56, which is also an 11. Yeah, there you go.
Nice.
56. So there's one quote that I really like. It's the day the flesh shapes and the shape that and the flesh the day shapes. The day the flesh shapes and the flesh the day shapes. And that's something that Leto says pretty much before he meets his end. And I think it's really something cool to ponder.
Can you read that again?
Yeah, it's the day the flesh shapes and the flesh the day shapes. So it's like an endless cycle.
Yeah, that's interesting. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Yeah, that's a good quote.
There's a couple that I like as well. I'll share
Yeah,
one.
please do.
I dropped it in the chat before we came on live, and it was about the beginning is the time to make sure the balances are correct. Something to that effect.
Yeah,
Really like.
I read that in the beginning of the show.
Oh, you did? Sorry.
Yeah. No, don't worry about it. You're good. It was perfect because you put that in there. I thought it'd be great. Here's one. These are from the later.
Thanks, SB. Love you, brother.
Yeah, what's up, SB? Thank you. Another quote is.
He's actually who I was talking about with the paralleling thing with the missionary protectiva. That's SB Alger.
Oh, all right. About. Oh, you got to go back then and watch the beginning. We were talking about your concepts there, SB. If you believe certain words, you believe their hidden arguments. When you believe something is right or wrong, true or false, you believe the assumptions in the words which express the arguments. Such assumptions are often full of holes, but remain the most precious to the convinced. And I really like that because it's something that I say a lot about words versus symbolism, where once you become symbol literate, the symbols speak to you in their own way, where words speak to you in a way that, I mean, who knows what a word, what does nice even mean, or bad? Like, who's bad? I'm bad. Is Michael Jackson bad? Is that good? Bad meaning bad, bad meaning good. Yeah. So it's like, yeah, it's just kind of a shout out, like a little reminder to not get so attached to some ideas or beliefs you have, because you could be wrong,
Oh, I found the quote. It's actually the last line of the book here in the book I have. This might be an appendix, actually. It says, when religion and politics ride the same cart, when that cart is driven by a living holy man, in parentheses, it says a baraka, nothing can stand in their path. Oh, it says, as the Bene Gesserit taught for centuries, long before they ran afoul of the Fremen. That's the quote.
Afoul.
Yeah, and
these people are true believers. Oops. We need to stay away from them.
Yeah. And it's funny because all the I don't know, vitriol and stuff that they went through as a people, the Fremen, for thousands of years, and then it's like they were gas vapors, and Wadi was just that spark, and it just boom, here we go. We're taking all this hardship and we're sending it all over the galaxy or universe. Yeah, Seven's just quoted that in the chat. The day the flesh shapes and the flesh the day shapes. All right, well, you guys plug anything or? Yeah, you want to plug anything or what?
I'd just like to say that mood is for cattle and women.
Yeah, a mood's not a thing for fighting. Exactly. In the immortal
Oktoberfest.
Yeah, that's in Vegas this year, right?
Fuck yeah, Flattoberfest Vegas.
I got
Come on, everybody.
I think I got to work. I'm going to check the dates, but I'm pretty sure I got to work. I'm going to try to get it all for next year, wherever. Do you know? As soon as you hear the dates for next year, let me know, and I'll try to take that weekend off because I would love to go
It's
to that.
usually the third week of October.
Okay.
Right before it's usually about the third week of October. Although this year's going to be fire. Mark Devlin's coming. Amanda Vollmer's coming.
Wow.
Another fellow from England. I can't recall his name off the top of my head. Jason Lindgren's going to be there. It's just a really fire crew. Jaron Campanella is going to be there. Jaronism.
Wow.
None of them have a proper beard, so I have to go and cover the beard.
Nice. Amazing. Maybe for 2024 we could get the Oversharon show there. I think we would at least have to get a table there. Maybe they'll somehow let us present, but that'd be amazing, Oh man.
Yeah, no, it's such a cool time. It's a couple days. Some people don't even sit in there that much and watch the presenters. They might watch one or two presenters. They might watch all of them. As many people watching the presentation are out in this area, just hanging out, sharing like minds. A lot of people make stuff. Karen has people out there that vend, and so they're making all kinds of stuff. So it's just a really neat time, real good time in Vegas this year. So yeah.
How do people find out about it if they want to find it? Excuse me.
FlatEarthFestivals.com. Or
Right.
go check out Karen BFE.
Amazing. Are we losing them? Anything you want to shout out, Joshua?
Well, I spend a lot of time on Telegram. You can find me on there as the branch. Also on Instagram as Appalachian Aesthetic. Reach out to me if you want to talk. If you want to do YouTube shows together, I really enjoy being a guest. I'm excited for Dune. So it'd be nice to convene in the future, maybe talk more about the movie.
Yeah, 100%. Where do you live? Or what area? I don't know if you want to say, but what's your address now?
West by God, Virginia.
Oh, all right, cool. So I'm in Connecticut, so I'm also on the East Coast.
Represent.
Amazing. All right. Well, everybody, yeah, I live very close to Yale. I've actually knocked on the door allegedly of the Skull and Bones building when I was hammered, and I think I might have peed on their front door, but it wasn't really me. But yeah. So
Minecraft, of course.
Yeah, that's before I had long hair. They'll never recognize me. But everybody, if you want more of me, go to my website, morelawsmoreproblems.com. The website I've had now for 10 years, and the name just keeps being, apropos to everything in my life. So morelawsmoreproblems.com. Check out also the Oversharon show I do with my lovely friend Sharon. Mr. Benjamin Balderson has been a guest and will be a future guest too. So look for that. And thank you guys to the chat. In the chat one more time. Thanks for hanging out. And I guess we will get the heck out of here. Let me just hit this end button, and good night, everybody. Take care. And we're done.